السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، وبعد. I want to apologize to the brothers for the mix-up in the title of the lecture. Initially, I wanted to give a series of lectures on the fiqh of the Prophet's seerah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Much in the same way as the other lectures I've given here at Muntaja, like on usul al-fiqh and ulum al-Quran. And since I was only going to be here for a day, I thought I would give a lecture on just the Meccan period. But when I was gathering my notes before I came a couple days ago, I realized that it really wasn't enough time to do the Meccan period in the time allotted. And so that would mean that I have to divide the Meccan period also. And so I felt that just giving some of the seerah really wouldn't be the most beneficial at this time. However, I still would like to do the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. So perhaps if the brothers invite me in August, and if I am able to come, inshallah, we'll then do the fiqh of the Prophet seerah, inshallah at that time. Be that as it may, the lecture that I thought we would do is regarding certain issues in the Manhaj, or the way or the manner of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And really I have 7 topics in front of me, and we have maybe a couple of hours. So I don't know, again, we're sort of running into the same problem as I did the first time. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to list the 7 topics, and then we can maybe choose 3 of them which perhaps we haven't talked about often, and then we'll do the other 4 at some other time to complete the set. The 7 topics are, an introduction to the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, general introduction. And I think, I've given lectures here in the United Kingdom previously on Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyya. There are other tapes I've done in the United States, so that sort of takes care of that. The second lecture is on, second part of this is on Da'wah unto Allah, and I sort of summarized that in the Leicester conference, last summer, some of the points in that, so that somewhat takes care of it. The third one is on jihad, and I've talked about that in different times, basically the questions and answers. The fourth one is concerning the Ummah and its leadership. The 5th one is concerning our position regarding the scholars, and the 6th one concerning unity and not being divided, and the 7th one about how to seek knowledge. So, I thought, given the time that we have about 2.5 hours, and then we'll have to break for Maghrib prayers. So, given that, why don't we take the topics on Ummah and the leadership of the Ummah, and also on our position regarding the scholars and how to be unified and not to be divided, as these are topics which we really maybe have not discussed in a formal session. I know that perhaps in questions and answers we have, but I'm assuming that we haven't discussed those in detail previously. So if my assumption is correct, and if you brothers feel comfortable with that, shall we proceed in that direction? Okay. So let us then begin. I'll open my book here. Regarding the first topic regarding Ummah and the Imamah. So this is lecture number 4. So I owe you 3 other lectures before this at some time. In future days we'll do lectures 1 through 3. Now the first point is that the Islamic Ummah is a single Ummah, and all the Muslims are a single Ummah, irrespective if we come from different nationalities, different countries. And even though we might come from distant, reaches of the earth, we are still linked by a single creed, a single faith, a single aqidah, and we are therefore one single ummah. As the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim, that the Muslim is a brother of his fellow Muslim. And likewise, this brotherhood is a brotherhood, not a physical relationship, right? Because obviously we're not all from the same parents, but it's a brotherhood in faith and iman. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, that the believers, the people who have iman, are ikhwa, are brethren. And so for this reason, our rights, mutual rights that we share, are equivalent. There's not a Muslim who has more rights upon us, who deserves more rights than another Muslim, but rather the Muslims, they share in their rights, as the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by Abu Dawud and Ibn Majah, that the Muslims are equivalent in their blood. In other words, the diya, right, the blood width of a Muslim, is the same irrespective of who's killed. Okay, so let's say you are the ruler of a country, or you're a scholar, or you're from some noble family, or you're the sheikh of a tribe, and you're a common Muslim, just an average Muslim, right? The blood width, the diya, if somebody was to murder you, is the same. It's not like in the West, right? Depending upon what type of job you have, your insurance policy is different. I mean, I don't know how it is here in England, but I know in the United States, for instance, we're required by law to have life insurance by all the companies. So depending upon really your rank, in the company, how much you earn, the insurance policy which is put for your life is greater. And likewise, for instance, if you are, let's say you're in an airplane, that's Allah Afia, and the airplane was to crash, they would pay money, right, to the people depending upon, your occupation. So they'll say, okay, you're a doctor, so you're worth, 80,000 pounds, and, you're just, a student in school, you're only worth 10,000 pounds. You see, and this is a type of injustice, even though they claim they believe in human rights and so forth, right? But be that as it may, the point is that the Muslims, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that they're equivalent in their blood, meaning in the blood within the diya. And likewise, the hadith continues that the Prophet ﷺ said that their protection encompasses even the weakest or the lowest amongst them, and they are a single hand against all other than them. So in other words, that the protection of the Muslims, gathers for all of them. In nationalistic countries, for instance, now, the full weight of the law will defend certain peoples of the society, but not necessarily other peoples of society. And let's try to think of an example. In the United States, for instance, before the Civil Rights Movement, while the American government would defend its citizens who were white, okay, before the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, and the citizenry who was black, for instance, they wouldn't have the same rights, and they wouldn't get the same defense by the country as it would for the white citizens, even though the white American and the black American are both citizens of that country and have to abide by the same law. So here, the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that the zimma, or the protection of the Muslims, encompasses even the lowest, Muslims in the society, and that they are a single hand against all others. And I think the meaning of that third part of the hadith, a single hand against all others, is clear to us. And likewise, we should understand that because the ummah of Islam is a single ummah, there is no difference between the Arab and the non-Arab, nor difference between a person's race, whether he's black or white, except due to his faith and his righteous actions, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Hujurat, إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ, that the most noble amongst you before Allah is he who has the most taqwa. And taqwa, which is sometimes translated as piety or fearing of God, is iman and righteous action. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by At-Tirmidhi that every Muslim is inviolable or haram upon another Muslim regarding his blood and his wealth and his honor. So therefore, one cannot take shed the blood of the fellow Muslim. One cannot take his wealth, nor can one bring disrepute to him. Okay, Muslims are in the same way equivalent in that thing. So there's not like there's a certain Muslim who you can shed his blood, or you can bring disrepute to him, or you can take his wealth. Now, of course, the Sharia has permitted the shedding of blood of a Muslim if he is a murderer, right? Or if he commits zina while in a state of marriage, or if he leaves his religion, he's no longer Muslim. But in general, this is the principle. So that's the first point we've learned regarding the ummah, that we are a single ummah, the ummah of Islam. And based upon that, that brings us to our second point, that it is therefore required of us to show allegiance and muwalat, and muwalat comes from the Arabic word al-wala, which means the love and the closeness in the heart, and at-tanasur, that we assist one another. So because we are a single ummah, we are required to love and ally and to be close and to assist one another. And part of that is that we mutually advise one another. We give nasiha to one another. And nasiha means to be pure to the other person. And likewise, this implies that we are unified, and it implies that we are not allowed to hate one another, to have rancor against one another, and also to cheat one another, or to split amongst ourselves. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Unite, or come together upon the rope of Allah, and do not divide yourselves. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has warned us from differing, because He has told us that if you differ amongst yourselves, you will fail and your power will go away from you. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ has said in a hadith, which I think all of us know, a hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, ad-deenu nasiha, that the deen is nasiha. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ said in the Arabic, ad-deen, it has the alif and lam before it, according to the Arabic grammar, means that the religion in its entirety is nasiha. And the Prophet ﷺ then explained it means nasiha to Allah, to His scripture, to the messenger, to the leaders of Muslims, to their common folk. And the Prophet ﷺ also said in a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari that you should assist your brother. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by Muslim, do not hate one another and do not turn your backs against one another, because when one hates somebody, he turns his back and he quits and abandons his brother. And so therefore, when we can contemplate these texts in the Quran and the Sunnah, and we understand its meaning, it tells us, it indicates to us that to work, to gather the Muslims, to unify the Muslims, and to gather them into a single unified body, and to repair the differences and the rancor which exists between them, is among the greatest of duties that Allah has made incumbent upon us. And to show that, we can quote a scholar by the name of Abdurrahman bin Sa'di, who lived in the first part of this century, and the last century, in the Hijrah century, but the first part of, according to the Christian era. He died in the 50s, and he was in Central Arabia, and he's the teacher of Ibn Uthaymeen. In one of his books, he says that to strive and to call, to gather the Muslims, to fix any problems that they might have between themselves is among the best of deeds, or is the best of deeds, he says, and it is better than to spend one's time completely just in spending one's time in fasting and in prayer, and it is among the best and greatest forms of jihad in the path of Allah, and it's upon the Muslims that they do not make their differences between them in opinions and in ideas regarding politics, a cause or a barrier which comes between them and the responsibilities of brotherhood which extend from their religion and from their faith. Rather, all these differences that they might have of opinions, they should make subsequent to this great principle. And so therefore, if Muslims have different opinions regarding something, and it's not a matter of religion, but it's a matter of ijtihad, we should not make these differences of opinion a cause of dividing amongst ourselves. But this brings us to a question that somebody might ask now, and this is point number 3, that, okay, if we understand now that Muslims are a single ummah, and we understand that we should assist fellow Muslims, but then who's a Muslim? I mean, who is a Muslim? And simply, a Muslim is whoever says, La ilaha illallah, and Muhammad Rasulullah, this shahada, this testimony of faith, that none is worthy of worship but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and at the same time does not do something or say something which negates this testimony of faith. For example, we know that a Muslim is pure, he's upon tahara when he does wudu, like for salah. And he remains upon purity unless he does an act which breaks his purity. For example, like he goes to the bathroom, that breaks one's purity. And so therefore, a Muslim remains a Muslim once he says La ilaha illallah, unless he does something which negates that testimony of faith. And the Prophet ﷺ, to indicate to this, we find a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whereby which the Prophet ﷺ said that he who testifies La ilaha illallah and faces our qibla, meaning he faces Mecca in prayer, and he prays our prayer, in other words, he prays like the Muslims pray, and he eats our slaughter, he is a Muslim, and he has what the Muslims have, and is also the responsibilities upon him are what is responsibilities upon the Muslims. And when we understand this definition of a Muslim, then we understand that a Muslim would be a person who would have in him, or could have in him, both good and evil, He might have both within himself. He might have acts of the sunnah and acts of innovation, bid'ah. He might have acts of obedience and acts of disobedience. And so therefore, we would show him that love, that wala that I mentioned earlier, and we would assist him to the degree of the good that is in him, to the degree of the sunnah that's in him, and to the degree of obedience to Allah that is in him. And we would dislike him, we would hate of him, and we would show an aversion to him to the degree of which he is having evil or disobedience unto Allah or innovation. And this is something which people have to understand. Muslims are not like the angels, that you're going to find them sinless and unsullied and having no disobedience to Allah. But a believer will still remain a believer, even though he might do acts of innovation, even though he might do acts of disobedience. And when a Muslim comes across a Muslim who's sinful, or a Muslim who has done an act of innovation, he still has to love him and support him, because that person still has the basis of Islam in him, the basis of Iman in him. And so to that degree, he must still love him and support him. But he must distance himself from that person and have an aversion to him to the degree of his sinfulness and of his innovation. And this is a very important principle to which Ibn Taymiyyah writes in one of his essays, that if in a single individual one finds good and evil, wickedness and piety, sunnah and bid'ah, he deserves from support and love, and likewise reward from Allah to the degree that is within him good. And at the same time, he deserves aversion and likewise punishment from Allah to the degree in which there is evil in him. And so therefore you gather for him, and he's gathered for him both qualities. And this is a principle which Ibn Taymiyyah then says, to which Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah have agreed upon. And those who have differed with them in this issue are the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, and those who have agreed with the Khawarij and Mu'tazila. And the Khawarij and Mu'tazila are two groups who have deviated from the people of the Sunnah due to issues like the issue of who's a Muslim. The Khawarij hold that whenever a Muslim commits a sin, he is an unbeliever. And the Mu'tazila say, well, even though he's not an unbeliever, he's not a believer, so we'll put him in a position between the two positions, and yet they still condemn him to eternity in hell. And so Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are different than that, but rather they recognize that an individual has in him both good and evil, has in him both sunnah and bid'ah, has in an individual might have piety and obedience to Allah and wickedness and disobedience to Allah, so they love him and they support him to the degree that's good in him, and yet at the same time they dislike him, they have aversion to him to the degree that's evil in him. Now, if we understand that, let us now, since we talked about who the Muslim is, let's now take to a little broader aspect, a wider circle, and that is regarding the different sects which have attributed themselves to Islam, but they're not from the sects of they're outside of the Sunnah. Because I think all of us, alhamdulillah, in this gathering, I would assume, and I'm certain I'm correct, that all of us, alhamdulillah, we all adhere, or we all attribute ourselves to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But we know there are different groups that do not attribute themselves to the people of Sunnah. So these groups that the Prophet ﷺ said when he said in his hadith that his ummah would divide into 73 groups, 72 of them would be in hell, and only one would be in paradise. And when asked concerning that group, the Prophet ﷺ said in one hadith, it is those who are upon what he is upon and his companions. What is the ruling concerning those 72 groups? Are they unbelievers? Are they still Muslims? This is a question which we'd like to answer here. And again, quoting Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Taymiyyah says that there is not a single sect among these 72 sects which the Prophet ﷺ has forewarned or informed that they are under the threat of punishment in hell, except there are many numbers of people in them which are not kuffar, not unbelievers, but rather they are believers. However, they have in them qualities of being astray and qualities of sinfulness. And so therefore they deserve the threat of punishment in the same way as the sinful Muslims, sinful believers deserve the threat of punishment. The Prophet ﷺ did not, Ibn Taymiyyah says, expel them from the fold of Islam, but rather he considered them his ummah. And he did not say that they were in the hellfire for all eternity. And then Ibn Taymiyyah says this is a great principle which one must observe. So let's try to explain this great principle that one must observe. Those sects that stand outside of the fold of the Sunnah, they are not unbelievers. They are not like the Jews and the Christians, but rather they are groups of Muslims who have gone astray concerning matters of belief, concerning practices of Islam, and therefore they are similar to the Muslim who has correct belief, who has correct worship of Allah, but sins. Both types of people, whether he has committed a bid'ah or a sin, he stands under the threat of punishment by Allah. And so therefore he is neither condemned to the hellfire for all eternity, nor is he considered an unbeliever, a kafir, but rather he is a believer who is under the threat of punishment. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, that concerning these people, they're under the threat of punishment. So, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He does not forgive the sin of shirk. Shirk is kufr, but He forgives any other sin less than that to whomever He wills. So some of them will even be forgiven and entered into paradise, either because they did great deeds for Islam, or because they suffered in this world, or because they will win the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or because perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will just forgive them out of His mercy. And then Ibn Taymiyyah says in another section of his fatwa that it is not permitted for anyone to charge a single Muslim to implicate any single Muslim as an unbeliever, as a kafir, even if he makes a mistake or he errs, until the evidence is established against him and the path is clear to him. For whoever has Islam has been established with certainty, one cannot remove that quality of Islam from him due to a doubt, but only after the establishment of the proof and the removal of doubt. So in other words, when we know a person to be a Muslim, or a group of people to be Muslims, we cannot then charge them as unbelievers due to a doubt that perhaps, or they have done something which might be unbelief, or where we think it might be unbelief. Until we are certain that they have actually done something which is unbelief, the proof has been made clear to them, and then therefore they know that what they're doing is unbelief, only then they can be charged as unbelievers. And likewise, we should understand that just because a statement is recognized in Sharia to be unbelief, doesn't mean that anybody who does it is an unbeliever, but rather somebody might say it out of ignorance, or somebody might say it out of ta'wil, which in this sense means that he thinks it is part of Islam, but he is mistaken. So it's a false or an erroneous interpretation. And so therefore, to call a specific individual a kafir is as if you're to call that specific individual to say that he's in the hellfire. And so that's a very great matter. And so therefore it has conditions that must be fulfilled, and it has impediments that must be removed. And if they are not kuffar, if they're not unbelievers, they are not hypocrites, but rather they are believers. And so since they're believers, one must seek forgiveness for them, and one must seek mercy for them from Allah. This is another important point that Ibn Taymiyyah says in his book Manhaj Sunnah. If we are to now, we understood, and I hope we all have, that these groups are not unbelievers, and they're not therefore hypocrites. I mean, they're believers. And if they're believers, then therefore we have to make dua to Allah, to ask Allah to forgive them, and for Allah to be merciful with them. And compare that with how the brothers are, or many brothers are, unfortunately, regarding Muslims who they disagree with. Do they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive their brothers? Do they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show mercy to their brothers, to guide their brothers? I mean, if we were to assume that they were upon the right, and sometimes, usually, neither party which differs is upon the right, but the truth is somewhere in between. So that's some basic principles regarding that. Now, we said this lecture was concerning the Ummah and its leadership. So now let us talk about the leadership of the Ummah. It is required in the Sharia, is a point of the law which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the people of responsibility have to choose an imam of the Muslims, and they have to give him a bay'ah, a covenant, okay, which they do on behalf of the Muslims. And the purpose of the imam is to lead the Muslims in their worldly affairs and to protect the religion, as Ibn Jama'ah said in one of his books. And so therefore he is the representative of the Ummah after bay'ah. And it has been, therefore it is not permitted for the Ummah to usurp the rights of the Imam. However though, if somebody does take leadership by force, by power, and he imposes himself as an Imam, the scholars of the Sunnah have said that he is an Imam, and he should be obeyed so long as he establishes amongst the believers the rule of the book and the sunnah, and he is just between them in judgment, and also in the division of property and wealth, and in rights, in distribution of rights, and also in establishing the hudud, and he protects the pathways, and he protects the Muslims, and he wages jihad against the enemies. So what is then therefore the purpose of the imam then? Is a responsibility. I mean, some brothers think that the issue of having an imam of the Muslims is something which is, maybe it's good, but it's not required. No, actually it's something required of our religion. The Muslims have an imam who represents them is something required. Who selects the imam? The one who selects the imam is the persons who are known in Arabic as Ahlul Halli wal Aqd. They are the people who are of leadership in the ummah, and they represent the ummah scholars. They represent the notables of the ummah, the people of position, of authority within the ummah. They choose the individual who is best suited to run the ummah. And therefore this individual then, his role is not only to preserve the religion, but also his role is to straighten and to the affairs, the worldly affairs of the believers. And so part of that is that he has to protect the believers. And part of that is that he wages jihad against the unbelievers. And part of that is that he distributes the wealth of the ummah between the believers in a correct manner. And part of it is that he judges people by the book and the sunnah. And part of that is that he judges people in justice, and that he helps the weak and the oppressed Muslims, and make sure that the strong do not take the right to the oppressed, and so forth and so on from the duties. And so this is something which is great and important indeed. And I'd like to add to it, if you look at the books of fiqh, especially like the books of fiqh written in the Hanbali school of fiqh, they usually start off, the first book they'll write about is Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purity. And then they'll talk about the book of Salah. And the reason why they start off with purity, because the greatest action is Salah. This is the most important action in our religion. And in order to have Salah, you must have purity, Tahara, so they begin with Tahara before Salah. And then they mention the book of Al-Janaiz, the book of funerals, because concerning the deceased, the most important act which is done for him is the funeral prayer, so they mention that after they mention the book of prayers. And after the Janaiz, they talk about Zakah, because Zakah is the second most important act after prayer. And then they talk about fasting, and then after fasting they talk about Hajj and Umrah, because that completes the actions, the 5 pillars of Islam. And afterwards they usually talk about the book of Jihad. And so somebody might ask, why did they talk about the book of Jihad after these acts of worship? And the reason why is the scholars realize that these acts of worship, like Salah, like the Zakah, like the fasting, like the Hajj, cannot be completed in the way that Allah loves unless there is an imam of the Muslims to protect these acts of worship. So the idea that many Muslims have today, and it's really part of the influence of secularism on the Muslim mind, that a Muslim, I can be a Muslim, I can pray, and I can fast Ramadan, and I can give my Zakah, and I can also make Hajj and Umrah, and the idea of having a political structure in Islam is not important. This is a really erroneous issue. And if you look at these matters, we can find how these acts of worship are not really completed in the way that Allah Azza wa Jal loves and wants and has required from us. Let us take, for instance, the prayer. The prayer has been commanded to be established, not that people pray by themselves, or that people just, pray in Jama'ah when they have a chance to, right? The prayer has been commanded to be established, not that people pray by themselves, or that people just, pray in Jama'ah when they have a chance to, right? But the prayer in Jama'ah, according to the strongest opinion, is required for every single male Muslim who has reached adulthood, right? And who is sane. It is required for him to pray in Jama'ah, prays the 5 prayers. Okay? Now, in order for him to pray the 5 prayers, let us look like a country like the United Kingdom, okay, or the United States where I'm from. Can a Muslim easily pray the 5 prayers in Jama'ah, 5 prayers as responsibility as required from Allah Azza wa Jal? No. The reason why is because since the system of the country is not based upon Allah's law, the time is not permitted for a person to pray the 5 prayers. When you go to certain Muslim countries, right, in the Middle East, you find them, because the system there is close to Sharia, they allow, and everything stops. Like in Saudi Arabia, if anybody ever made Umrah or Hajj, and you'll notice that when it comes time for Dhuhr, everything stops and people can make their prayers. So here shows that without the position of an imam, the prayers cannot be completed as Allah loves. Likewise, the Eid prayer. I don't know how it is in London, but I know in the United States when we have Eid, every single year we have a division in the Eid, and there's different groups praying Eid and so forth. This is not from the Sunnah of Islam, but rather the Sunnah of Islam is that the people have a single Eid, and unless the people are of such large numbers that they cannot be gathered in a single place, then you can have different Eids due to people not being able to reach a single place, or because the land is not big enough to have so many people, and like large areas of Muslims, like in Cairo where there's like 12 million people. I mean, obviously people couldn't pray in a single area. So here, again, not having an imam causes this type of confusion. Okay, and also we can now take zakat. Well, zakat is a requirement which is due to Allah, and a Muslim might from himself take out his zakat. But what about those Muslims who don't pay zakat? Who is going to make sure that they pay their zakat? This is the role of an imam, that he sends out people. And likewise, the distribution of zakat. How can we distribute zakat as it's supposed to be without having an imam and a state to allow for distribution of zakat as it's supposed to be? When you come to the fasting, determining when the month begins and when the month ends. Every year in the United States we have a controversy and people start Ramadan at different times. But when there's an imam, right, it tells that we start the month now and we end the month now, like in Muslim countries, and so there's not that type of differences as we have in non-Muslim countries. And likewise in Hajj also, for many Muslims, if there's not an imam of the Muslims to protect the Muslims, right, and to allow them for them to travel to Mecca in an easy means without being stopped, then therefore many Muslims cannot perform Hajj. And this is like the case of Muslims who live under certain non-Muslim countries, like in China, for instance. There are almost 100 million Muslims. They can't make Hajj because the Chinese government doesn't permit them to make Hajj and so forth. So you can see that even the acts of worship cannot be performed as Allah loves Azza wa Jal without having an imam. Okay, so now that we've shown that having an imam is something which is required, what is the duties of the ummah toward the imam? If the imam completes his duties and fulfills his duties, then it is upon the ummah of Islam that they give him two rights, and that is obedience and assistance. And so therefore they are forbidden to revolt against the just imam, and even the unjust imam, according to the strongest opinion, they are forbidden to revolt against him. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ has said that there is no obedience to a creature, to a human being, in that which entails disobedience to the Creator. And this is reported by Ahmed and Al-Hakim. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith that obedience is in that which is correct, in ma'ruf, meaning that which is in the Quran and the hadith has been established by Islam. This is in Bukhari and Muslim. So if the imam is just, it's required to obey him in that which we know is not disobedience to Allah. And if he's unjust, it is therefore we're required to obey him in that which we know is obedience to Allah and the Messenger ﷺ, like jihad in the path of Allah and similar matters. So even if the imam is unjust, we still have to obey him in that which is part of the religion of Islam. However, though, if the imam is an unbeliever, if he becomes an apostate, it then becomes required to revolt against him if one has the ability to do so. And it's certain by doing so it will not result in a greater evil. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great scholar, who in his commentary on on Sahih al-Bukhari, Fath al-Bari, he said that when the imam becomes a disbeliever, or he falls into disbelief, he is to be removed by the ijma', the consensus of the ummah, and it is required upon every Muslim to stand up and do that if he has the ability, the strength to do that, and he will have the reward from Allah. And he who is, weak, or he who like for instance, he tries to, the word is that in other words, he acquiesces to the situation. Okay, the word I'm looking for, he acquiesces to the situation. He has a sin, and if he is weak, it is required for him to make hijrah. So here Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says in Fath al-Bari 3 points, that when the imam becomes an apostate, it's required upon those who have ability to remove him, and they will have the reward from Allah. And if a person acquiesces to the situation, accepts it as it is, and doesn't care, he will have a sin from Allah. And if a person is unable to remove him, it is required for him to make hijrah outside of those lines. And their evidence is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that we should obey ulil amri minkum, those who have the affair amongst you, meaning the Muslims. And so therefore, a unbeliever is not from the Muslims, and so one should not show him obedience. And the Prophet ﷺ had said that we cannot revolt against the rulers so long as they establish amongst us prayer, and until you see, in another hadith, until you see a clear unbelief. And it is a responsibility and obligation upon the Ummah that it has a single Imam. I mean, not now like in the Muslim world we have 52 rulers. I don't know what the current number is, but it's more than 50 at least. Ibn Taymiyyah says that if one is to imagine, suppose that some of the Ummah has left a single Imam, that is a sin from that part of the Ummah. And if the rest or others are not able to have a single Imam, then it is permissible for it to have many Imams, each Imam establishing the hudud and fulfilling the rights. So, in other words, Ibn Taymiyyah realized, especially in his day when the Muslims became weaker, that if there is a single Imam of the Muslims and some of those Muslims do not. In other words, Ibn Taymiyyah realized, especially in his day when the Muslims became weaker, that if there is a single Imam of the Muslims and some of those Muslims do not want to follow that single Imam, then those Muslims are sinful. And if the Muslims are in a situation where, because they are weak, they cannot have a single Imam, in other words, that each Imam wants to hold his own power, then in this case, this is a situation we have to accept it, but each Imam is still required then to apply the hudud and is required to judge by Allah's book between the believers. Now, if the Muslims have a single Imam, and the whole Ummah has gathered and rallied upon this Imam, then it's required upon every single Muslim to believe that he is a single Imam, that he's the Imam of the Muslims and is one to obey him. Imam Ahmed was once asked regarding the hadith that he who dies and does not have an Imam, he will die the death of Jahiliyyah. And the hadith means is that in the time of Jahiliyyah, the time before Islam, the Arabs, each tribe used to have its own leader. And people used to not follow their tribal sheikhs. Everybody wanted to do his way, his own way. So somebody asked Imam Ahmed concerning this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that he who dies and does not have an Imam, he dies like the people who died in the period of Jahiliyyah. Imam Ahmed said, do you know who the Imam is? The Imam is the one who the Muslims have all gathered upon him being the leader. This is the Imam and this is the meaning. So therefore this hadith is not applicable when the Muslims are divided and they have many leaders amongst themselves. But rather when the Muslims have a single leader to which they've all agreed upon that this is their leader, everybody must then agree to him being an Imam, and everyone must at the same time show him obedience. And at the same time, if the situation is the opposite where you have many leaders, then everyone should be obeyed in his principality or in his area. And this is the time of fitna and division, like the time which we are living in. Part of the regulations regarding the Imam is that we are required to show nasiha, which I explained before, to the Imam by every single Muslim. It is required upon the Muslim body to show nasiha, to give advice, sincerity to the Imam, and also to command him to do good and to forbid him to do evil, from doing evil, doing such in a knowledgeable way, in a wise way. And likewise it is required to give him that advice in private, so long as he does not make any public sinfulness. And also if his harm is just something which is upon himself. However, though, if the evil is public and the harm is public, then it's required to make a public amending of that evil, so long as it doesn't result in a greater evil. Okay, so here's the issue. One is required to give nasiha to the Imam, and one is required to command the Imam in good and forbid the Imam from doing evil. If the Imam is doing a sin by himself, a personal sin, right, then one must do it personally. But if the Imam is doing a sin which is then done publicly, okay, or is doing some sort of sin or some sort of evil which affects all the Muslims, then that nasiha, then that commanding of good, then that forbidding of evil must be done publicly. So provided it doesn't result in a greater evil. The evidence to this is that Nawawi, in his commentary on Sahih Muslim, took a statement when Ka'ab bin Ujra, who was one of the Prophet's companions, said regarding Abdurrahman ibn al-Hakam, who was one of the Umayyad princes, when Abdurrahman ibn al-Hakam was giving the khutbah sitting down, Ka'ab bin Ujra said, "Unzuru ila hadha al-khabith yakhtub qa'idan." Look at this evil man, he is giving a khutbah sitting. Okay, Nawawi, looking at that statement, what did Nawawi understand? Nawawi was a great scholar of fiqh. He said, this shows this shows an evidence that one is to reject evil, or to make, repel evil, and one is to repel the evil of the rulers if they go against the sunnah. And likewise, one of the Prophet's companions, Amara bin, one time saw Bishop bin Marwan, who was another Umayyad ruler, raising his hands during Dua and the khutbah, and the Prophet's companion said, "May Allah make those two hands, ugly," or and this is reported also in Sahih Muslim. And likewise, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri one time came out to and Marwan ibn Hakam was giving the khutbah, and so Marwan ibn Hakam, because the people disliked him, instead of beginning the Eid prayer first, right, and then doing the khutbah afterwards, he began with the khutbah, and then he did the salah, because he wanted to make sure the people were going to listen to what he says, you see. And so Abu Sa'id al-Khudri challenged him upon this point, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he challenged him on this point, and Marwan said, "I know that you're supposed to begin with the salah, but this is what I'm doing." And so then Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, "By Allah, those two hands will not come with any good." And he said it 3 times, and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri publicly left. So here, and now we're commenting on that also, he said, here's an indication upon the requirement of commanding good and forbidding evil, and even if the evil is done by the ruler, and the evil is to be changed by the hand, and now he says if one can do it, and if one cannot do it by the tongue, if he can change that evil by the hand. And there are other evidences which, for this reason, and likewise, based upon this, the commanding good and forbidding evil is not something which is just restricted to those people who have been set up by the state to command good and forbid evil, which is known as Ahlul Hisbah, and the people who have been given the responsibility by the state, but rather upon any single Muslim, it is required to command good and forbid evil, and it's permissible for him. And this is the statement of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, and he said this is the ijma' of the ummah, that they used to command good and they used to forbid evil, and the Muslims would acknowledge that. And likewise, we should understand that when commanding good and forbidding evil, the point, of course, is that one should not result in that a greater evil. And if one says that by commanding good or forbidding evil, that it's going to result in some people being harmed and so forth, is that an excuse not to command good and forbid evil regarding the ruler? Ibn Taymiyyah said this is not true, but rather that even if some of the righteous people are harmed, one is still required to command good and forbid evil in order to push back a greater evil. And there are other evidences regarding this matter. Finally, the final point to conclude with is that what happens if the Imam does not fulfill all his responsibilities? Then who is responsible to fulfill those responsibilities? For instance, like now you might have a leader of the Muslim who doesn't do everything which he's supposed to do as leader of the Muslims, okay? So are the Muslims just supposed to let those matters just not be done? Or does somebody supposed to stand up and fulfill those duties? The truth is, the matter is that the Muslims must then fulfill those duties when the Imam does not do it, as long as they have the ability to. And the evidence is that what was derived by a Tahawi regarding the incidents of the Battle of Mu'tah. In the Battle of Mu'tah, the Prophet ﷺ put a certain person in charge of the army, and he said that if he was to die, then so-and-so was to be in charge, and that if he was to die, then so-and-so was to be in charge. And all 3 men died. And so then they had no leader for the army. And Khalid ibn Walid then took it upon himself to lead the Muslims during the battle. Okay, who put Khalid in charge? Nobody did. He saw that there was no leader now in the battle after the three had died, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and also Abdullah ibn Rawaha, and the third escapes me now. But who was surrounded by the people who then eventually murdered him. They had surrounded his household, and it was during the time of the Eid. It was during the time of Dhul Hijjah, like the days that we are in today. And so when it came time for Eid, Uthman couldn't leave his household because he was surrounded. But Ali ibn Abi Talib then led the Muslims in Salat al-Eid. Okay, how did Ali ibn Abi Talib? He wasn't given the authority to do that, but because the Eid prayer has to be led, and there are Muslims that needs to be led in prayer, he then took it upon himself. However, again, in this matter, one has to understand that one has to try to achieve the leadership which is being forsaken, as long as it doesn't result in a greater evil. And likewise, we also know from the history of our ulama, Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, when the rulers of Damascus fled Damascus because they had heard the Mongolians were coming to take over Damascus, and the people then the evil people in the city started to do public sins. Ibn Taymiyyah with his companions went around applying the hudud, breaking the different wineries that people had, like caskets with wine in and so forth, and making sure that public order was kept. Again, who put him in charge? He was neither the qadi of the time, he was neither the mufti of the time, he was just a teacher in a masjid. But because when there is nobody fulfilling that, it goes back to the ummah, and again, it is regarding that there's not a greater harm occurring from that matter. So to conclude that lecture in brief, regarding the ummah and its leadership, we said the first point that the ummah of Islam is a single ummah, that we have to support every single believer. We define a believer whoever says the testimony of faith and has not done an act of apostasy. We've also said that the groups which are part of Islam, but however have fallen out of the Sunnah, are still Muslims, and we are to still ask Allah forgiveness for them. We're still to observe the rights they have as Muslims. We also have said that it's required to select an imam, and we've mentioned some of the duties that the ummah has towards the imam and the duties the imam has towards the ummah. And we've also discussed the issue about commanding good and forbidding evil if the imam makes that sin, and also what happens if the imam does not fulfill the duties which he has been entrusted with. So perhaps we can take some questions before we go to the next part, or so just do this, but there's a break. If someone wants to stand up, use the restroom also.
Just you said there's no reference to electing an imam. I always know there was a hadith that said whenever two Muslims travel, they shouldn't elect an imam, otherwise Shaitan will be their imam. Would this be evidence further?
I don't recollect the hadith that you're mentioning. However, though, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that no three Muslims, when they're traveling, should travel unless they have, put somebody in charge of them. And Ibn Taymiyyah deduced from this in his book Siyasa Shari'iyah, which is a book he wrote to the Muslim ruler of his time on how to rule according to Sharia. Ibn Taymiyyah deduced regarding this matter that if the Prophet ﷺ commanded that a group of Muslims would be for a short period of time having a leader upon themselves, and them being three, which is the minimum of a jama'ah of Muslims, then how much more required it is when Muslims are in large numbers are continually with each other. So that hadith is an evidence, and if this hadith also, if it has the same meaning, would be a supportive evidence. That's right.
When he first returned up from the now, was this I think given publicly at the time of the Muslims, because basically when something like that happens, it happens to be, I think that's our university how should advice be given?
No, I mean the Prophet's companion said it publicly, and that's why they know the incident. He didn't go to the Imam after the Salah. Then and there. And those days the Imam, you have to understand that what a difference is now. In those days the political leader, right, would lead the Salah also. Okay? And that's how the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, I mean the Imam of the Muslims was not just the political Imam, but also he was their Imam in Jihad, the Commander-in-Chief, as we might say in the parlance of today. He also was the Imam of them in Salah, okay? Because usually they were knowledgeable people at the same time. Now, it was only later on when the Muslims became, the leadership, those three things divided. So you had political leaders, and you had religious leaders, and you had military leaders. Okay, but in the time of the Prophet, in the time of the Salaf, that all was combined in a single man. The Imam was also a mujahid, and he was also a scholar. Okay, and that will return in the end of the time. I mean, when Isa and Maryam are return to the Ummah, you also have a scholar and a mujahid, and also the leader of the Muslims, and the same thing with the Mahdi. Now, the point is also the Sunnah was well known. So when Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, or Ka'b bin Ujra who said this, and wasn't Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Ka'b bin Ujra, when he said this, and he mentioned this thing, the Sunnah was known, and this was a deviation from the Sunnah. Today, people don't know the Sunnah. Alright? And so therefore, to stand up and say in the prayer, may Allah make your hands, disfigured, okay, would result in a greater evil, because the person who raises his hands might not know that this is against the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So what would be the best way to handle it in this matter? The best way would be to try to inform him, teach him, bring him the hadith and so forth, gently on the side. In other words, not to, rebuke him publicly in that matter.
Even if it meant a hadith being quoted that was mawdu', and the majority say to want people accepting the hadith, and then they don't walk out after that accepting the hadith. Right,
but I mean, here again, what is, yes, if somebody says the Imam says something publicly, right? It depends on the masjid. If you could, some masajid, the Imam might respect you. Let's say you're at a university, and the one who leads the salah is a brother, and he says, okay, you're a brother, so he doesn't feel that he has any, level above you, okay? So, he quotes a hadith which is mawdu' and salah, and so you come to the Imam before they walk out and say, brother, I think there was a hadith which is weak. Do you mind? I stand up and clarify. He says, go ahead, brother. There's no harm in that, right? But then let's say you go to a public masjid in London, okay, which has a khatib and so forth, and you stand up and you said something. Would it result in a greater good? Would the people look at you and say, oh, if this brother is saying is obviously the Imam was wrong? Or would the people feel that who is this young man standing up and causing, a ruckus in the masjid and causing a fitna? Obviously, they would feel the latter. So, what would be the way to solve that problem? Well, if the Imam reads Arabic, for instance, and the Imam is somebody who you can get to know, you might give him a book of hadith that has some sahih hadith in it, which then, he might then use to give his khutbah. You might, if you know that somebody of his peer level, let's say he respects somebody in the city who's maybe a little bit older than you, you know what I'm saying? You can ask maybe that person to come and talk to him about that matter, and then maybe that Imam would correct it or something like that. Or if sometimes that is not possible, and the Imam is a person of bid'ah or a person of ignorance, you might write a paper and distribute it after Salah the next Jum'ah, if that would not result in a greater evil. It depends from situation to situation.
There was brother at the back.
Nice enough.
In our community, there are a number of people who sell alcohol publicly, and they've been given advice, and they argue that it is haram to sell alcohol to minors. What should be our feeling towards people?
You must hate them to the degree of their sinfulness. And if, for instance, let us imagine we have something similar like this in certain areas in the United States. Okay, you might find some brothers selling, out of a store where he sells alcohol or products from pork or pornographic materials and so forth. If the Muslims say, look, I'm not going to buy from you, and there are enough good Muslims in the neighborhood, they're not going to buy from him, and he feels, that this is going to hurt him, and therefore he feels a little bit shy, and that might result from him to give up selling it, then that's good. However, though, if people, Muslims and non-Muslims, go and buy from him, they don't care, right? And by you not buying from him, right? You should not buy from him, maybe, so you don't give your money to something and buy from a pious Muslim, right? But at the same time, you should try to keep some relations with him in order to give him da'wah, And if you yourself can't, convince him, maybe somebody else can go and convince him. Whatever it means to make his heart soften. Again, returning the salam is part of abandoning, the sinful or the mubtada' or the innovator. And here again, it's between the benefits and the harms. Okay, the Sahaba they used to not return the salam to those people who do public sins. Okay, so that's the principle. But if everybody's doing sins publicly, and you don't return those salams, then therefore you will not bring any occurrence in change. And let me recite the story which shows you how the Salaf used to act and how it would affect. There was a person by the name of Sabir bin Assal, who lived in the time of Umar al-Khattab. And he used to ask questions regarding the Quran, not in seeking knowledge, but in order to try to, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, to seek the interpretation of what you cannot know, and to seek fitna. Okay. So he asked Umar ibn al-Khattab regarding az-zariyat, what does these verses mean? So Umar al-Khattab, sensed from him that he was not seeking these, he wanted knowledge, but sensed from him that he was seeking fitna, and he was seeking to understand that which, the knowledge of which a person cannot know. So Umar al-Khattab beat him, okay? And after Umar al-Khattab, had beaten him, Umar al-Khattab then, and Umar was in Medina, Umar al-Khattab then gave a command, okay, that no Muslim should sit with this person. Okay. We then find this individual in Basra, which is in southern Iraq. I mean, between Medina and Basra, there's maybe 1,000 miles or so. Okay. And he comes to a gathering of Muslims sitting down. He wants to sit down with them, and they stand up and they go away saying, "This is the command of the Emir of the believers." Now, how does this person would feel? I mean, even if he went to another country, the Muslims didn't want to deal with him. So then he goes back to Umar and he said, "Everything which was in my head is now gone." Okay. So, but that shows that when you abandon somebody in that sense, okay, it causes a change. And it's the same thing like a father would do in his household with a disobedient child, right? You might have experienced in your life growing up, or if you're a parent, you might have, practiced this, or you might have seen others practice this, that if a person has a number of kids, okay, and one kid is acting up, the parents will say, "Look, no one is to play with, Ahmed, for instance, and, Ahmed is supposed to go to his room and stay there until he apologizes for what he does, or until he stops acting that way." The whole household, right, leaves him alone, and then the child, right, or the girl or the boy, right, feels himself or herself that, really he has to amend his behavior. So he comes back. You preserve the others from doing that way again, because the other kids now know that if they were to do that type of goofing off in the house, they're going to get the same type of punishment, and that one also is amended. This is the aim of of abandoning a Muslim. This is the aim of not returning the salam to a Muslim. But as what occurs now, that people they find a deviant Muslim who might be deviant or a sinful Muslim, and then you abandon him. Well, all you've done is you've left him to forsake him, because by you abandoning him, you haven't harmed. He hasn't felt anything, specifically, unless you have a certain relationship with him, like he's your brother or he's your son or your daughter or something like that. But otherwise, he would feel nothing, specifically regarding that. And more sad, besides the point, is that people abandon themselves to things sometimes which are not necessary to have, abandonment upon.
Is that the same with the three men that didn't go off to war?
That's even a better story. May Allah reward you. Right, the story of the three, Sahaba who did not have an excuse. They didn't go out of the battle of Tabuk. Allah revealed certain verses in Surah Tawbah regarding their repentance, and also reading Sahih al-Bukhari, that they felt that as one says, he felt as the earth, there was no place for him on the earth, and so that's the same.
I think brother at the back.
No, it is allowable. Indeed, it is required to have an emir for society. So whenever the Muslims gather upon something, they are to have some sort of imara between them. But the right of that emir is not like the right of the emir of the Muslims. For instance, the emir of the salah, the imam of the salah, right? What are his rights? His rights are that we follow him exactly. The Prophet ﷺ said that if he says Allahu Akbar, you say Allahu Akbar. And when he says غَيْرُ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ, then you say Ameen. You don't say Ameen before that. And if he makes ruku', then you make ruku', right? And so we mimic him even in our movements for that period. When he says Allahu Akbar, until he says Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay? Now the emir of journey, do we mimic him in his on the trip? I mean, for instance, if he scratches his head in the car, do we scratch our heads also and so forth? No, because his rights are different here, right? So if there is some difference, should we take this road or should we take this road? And we can't agree. It goes back to him, for instance. He makes sure that we, stop to make prayer. He makes sure that, makes the final, we should stop the journey at this point and continue and so forth. So he has a certain type of leadership. And likewise, the Muslims, when they gather upon a matter, okay, they establish amongst themselves an emir, sometimes even without announcing that he's the emir. Like the brother, right, has become the emir of this gathering, even though we didn't, give him a bay'ah or something like that and select him emir. In what sense that this gathering needs some sort of organization, okay? It needs some sort of order. And so therefore we know this now, we understand, right, nobody had any problems that when somebody raises his hand, he decides, does this brother first and that brother second, and this brother's question goes and so forth. He's started the lecture, he'll say to end the lecture and so forth. So this is some sort of leadership in Imara. So every, Imara has its own thing, and if you have any doubts in other matters, ask Ibn Uthaymeen, and I'm sure he'll, give you a fatwa regarding that. I don't know.
I'm going to say the other, yes.
No.
Can I just ask a question about the privacy of having Imam? So I've been two things. One thing saying that it's a software device has Imam to the other thing saying no, it doesn't say Imam to the because we're living in a situation where because the Muslim Tafsir is basically perceiving this stuff, the punishment from Allah that he removed the Imam and the Imam from the therefore you expect the Muslims to and make them despise Muslims and eventually Allah will grant peace.
No, that's not true. I mean, both the statements are extreme, and the truth is always between the extreme in every matter. Okay, to say that al-imara is the most important religious obligation is not true. I mean, if we look at the text, just look at the number of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ concerning salah, and look at the number of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ concerning imara. Okay, what do you find more of? Look at the ayat in the Quran concerning tawheed. Look at the ayat in the Quran concerning imara. What do you find more of? So this is an indication that that which is most important, right, the explanation is going to be greater upon the elucidation, and what is known in the Usul al-Fiqh al-Bayan is going to be stronger. And so therefore the elucidation which Allah has given in the Quran to things like prayer, to things like the matters of belief, to things like the akhlaq are greater than He has given to the rulings, the regulations concerning al-imara. I mean, imara in the Quran might be found in just 2 or 3 verses, in the whole thing. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at any book of hadith, like take Sahih al-Bukhari, Kitab al-Ahkam, which is the 9th volume in the English translation, or Kitab al-Imara, which I think is like the 3rd or 4th volume in the English translation, you find the hadith there compared to other subjects are less. The most of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regard prayer and jihad in general. So the point is that that's an extreme to say it is the most important matter. Okay. The other extreme to say that we don't need, an imam is also, or that we need to correct the aqidah also is a fallacy, because you really cannot correct aqidah, or you cannot, correct the believers' deviations unless there is an imam to enforce that correcting. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you can only go so far by just word of mouth and preaching. Okay, but then comes the sword of the Sharia. Okay, to establish the proof against those who don't want to accept it. And let's take an example in this matter. I guess many of you, if not all of you, probably have heard of Musaylimah al-Kazzab. Okay, who was Musaylimah? Okay. Huh? False prophet. Okay, he was a false prophet who announced prophethood during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and he lived in the first times of Abu Bakr. What happened to Musaylimah's da'wah to false prophethood? I mean, whole sections of Arabia followed him. Bani Hanifa in Central Arabia followed him. Okay, also sections of Bani Tamim followed him when Sajjah, who was a false prophetess, and married him and so forth. What happened to that da'wah of false prophethood? It was put to an end in a relatively short period of time, in a matter of months. Okay, why? Because there was an Imam of the Muslim, Abu Bakr, who sent an army, and after them insisting upon that type of apostasy, put them back into the fold of Islam by saying. Now, look at the example of somebody like Ghulam Ahmed of Qadian, that false prophet, what we call the Qadianis. How long has his da'wah lasted now? Since the end of the 1800s. And it's spread, and they have centers and active du'at around the world. Why? Because there was no imam to wage jihad and to correct this false belief. Okay. Also look at the reformers in Islamic history. Okay. If you look at the reform done, there were many other reformers throughout Islamic history who called to Tawheed and to leave shirk, right? But many of them, their da'wah didn't spread far. You know, they were able just to write books and so forth. But Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, because he found an emir who agreed to that da'wah and who supported them, right, was able to implement that and to end the worship of graves and so forth in Central Arabia, you know, what we now call Saudi Arabia. So, you know, as I mentioned the example before with the prayer and the fasting and the zakah and the hajj, okay, you really cannot complete these acts of worship unless there is jihad, and there cannot be jihad unless there is an imam. Okay, and the same thing with correcting deviation belief. Correcting deviation belief cannot come to the matter that Allah Azza wa Jalla wants, okay, unless there is an imara, okay. And look at the Prophet ﷺ seerah, right? When did the most people come into Islam? During Mecca or during Medina? In Medina, when the Prophet ﷺ had a state and had jihad and was able to, you know, check the unbelievers, then the people were able to come to Islam. So, I mean, that's also a misunderstanding of how Allah's Sunnah is on the earth. Yeah?
I think we should go on to the second part of the topic today, inshallah, to cover, and then we'll go on to the question. I apologize for the example of the second part.
Inshallah. So we said that the second lecture which we're going to discuss, or the second section, is we talked about, you know, the leadership, the political leadership of the Ummah in terms of the political leaders. Now let's talk about the religious leadership of the Ummah. What is our position regarding the scholars? And the scholars, who are the ulama? Okay, the ulama, the scholars are, we mean by scholars not like, for instance, physicists and doctors and biologists and computer scientists. I mean, they are scholars in their field, but specifically here we mean those who know Allah's Sharia, those who have fiqh in Allah's religion and act upon their knowledge, act upon that guidance that they have learned. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised knowledge in the Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken highly of the knowledgeable in His book. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ? Are they equal, equivalent, those who know and those who do not know? And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has testified that only He is to be worshipped. Allah says, شَهِدَ اللَّهُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ. Allah testifies that there is none worthy of worship but Him, وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ, and the angels, وَأُولُو الْعِلْمِ, and also the people of knowledge. They also testify to that. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has linked His testimony that only He deserves to be worshipped with the angel's testimony that He is only to be worshipped, with the statement of the testimony of the scholars that only He is to be worshipped. And that shows how great they must be for Allah to link them first with the angels, and more importantly then to link them, the angels and the scholars, with Him Azza wa Jal. And so therefore the ulama are of this rank, and likewise the ulama are the most best of the creatures of Allah's creation, and the proof is that because they are the ones who have the most fear of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ, that those who fear Allah among His servants are the scholars. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said regarding those who fear Him, right? He has said in Surah Al-Bayyinah, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ, that they are the best of the creatures. So it shows that the ulama therefore are the best of the creatures. And so therefore, since they are the best of the creatures, and since they have such a high rank before Allah Azza wa Jal, we are required to obey them by the command of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Nisa, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول, obey Allah and obey the Messenger, وأولي الأمر منكم, and those who are in charge from you, amongst you. And a number of the earliest scholars said that those who are in charge refers to the scholars. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ has said in a hadith regarding the merit of the scholars, he said that the merit of the scholar upon the one who's just a worshipper, he's not a scholar, is like the merit that I have upon the least above you. So it shows that the scholar, his rank compared to a worshipper, is like the rank the Prophet ﷺ has to the least of the Muslims. And also the Prophet ﷺ has said that the person who teaches good, Allah and the angels and the inhabitants of the heavens and the inhabitants of the earth, even the ant within its hole and even the fish within its sea, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and to have mercy upon the one who teaches people good. And somebody might ask, well, why do the animals ask that? Well, the animals ask that because the animals have rights, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated upon the Sharia. And the scholar, knowing these rights, will then tell people not to oppress animals. Like for instance, the Prophet ﷺ forbade us to, brand an animal in its face. Okay? You're supposed to brand, you can brand your animal, like for instance, if you have, many of us live in cities now, might not know how farms are, but if you live in areas of farmland where animals might, share the same pasture land, people will brand like their cattle, for instance, in order to recognize that this is my cow as opposed to, your cow and so forth. And however, the Prophet ﷺ forbade us to brand the animal in its face. The Prophet ﷺ also commanded us that when we slaughter animals, that we should sharpen our knives. That we shouldn't sharpen the knife in front of the animal. The Prophet ﷺ has forbidden us to kill certain animals. He's forbidden us to kill the ant, for instance. He's forbidden us to kill the bee, And so therefore the animals, when the Prophet ﷺ forbade us to take animals just for target practice, okay, just to kill them just as target practice and so forth. The Prophet ﷺ said that he told about a woman who will go to hell because she held her cat, not feeding her or allowing her to go out and eat from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for her. So if this is the case, okay, that these animals have rights and so forth, and the scholar would teach about the rights, and then the animals are grateful for this and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the scholar. And so therefore, part of that is that we not only obey them, but that we also love them and we respect them and we honor them. And amongst the scholars of the Ummah, there are 4 in particular who have a very high rank, and for this reason why the Ummah as a whole has agreed upon following them and upon adhering to the way, and that is the 4 Imams, Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi'i and Ahmed radiallahu anhum. And whenever we find a scholar, whether those 4 Imams or anyone else, makes an error in one of his opinions or something that he says which goes against the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we should know this, that there is not a single scholar in this Ummah who the Ummah has gathered upon his piety and upon his knowledge and has recognized him to be a man of knowledge and piety, who willfully goes against the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But that if he goes against the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, it's one of 3 reasons. Either he didn't believe in this hadith to be authentic, or he thought that the ruling was abrogated, or for instance he thought that this hadith does not apply to that situation. And many reasons sprout from that. Now with this we should understand that it is not required for us to follow any specific imam in particular, but rather one should ask anybody of knowledge if a person has an issue which he does not know the ruling has occurred to him. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge, the people of the reminder, meaning the Quran, and if you do not know. And so therefore, if a Muslim an event occurs in which he does not know Allah's ruling, he needs to know what is Allah's ruling regarding that matter, he can ask whoever he believes will give him the opinion of, give him the ruling from Allah's Sharia, the position from the Quran and from the Hadith. But as to follow somebody in specific, and or require people to follow someone in specific, this is not an evidence. And I'd like to add something to this. For instance, I hear often now, recently the brothers, at least a couple of times in the last few days, saying that we should follow the Kibar al-Ulama. And this is true, we should follow the Kibar al-Ulama. And then I ask them, I say, well, who do you mean? They might mention, 2 or 3 or 5 individuals. And then they say we should only follow them and not anyone else. And I ask them, is this truly from the Sharia that you say that you're only to follow 2 or 3 or 4? For instance, if we found, is it permissible for an imam to go against the opinion of the 4 imams, for instance? In other words, can somebody give a fatwa regarding something which either Abu Hanifa, Malik, or Shafi'i, or Ahmed gave a fatwa opposing to it? Is it permissible in the Sharia according to Usul al-Fiqh? Of course it is. And there's a number of examples where Ibn Taymiyyah gave a fatwa, in a matter which all four imams have a position opposite to his position, but he felt that the evidences were stronger in this opinion. So to say that it is incumbent to follow 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 individuals is a statement which there is no proof in. However, though, what is incumbent is that if a Muslim has knowledge, he should seek the evidence. If he does not have knowledge, he should ask any person who he believes will give him a fatwa according to the Quran and the Sunnah. And if he has the ability to make ijtihad, he should make ijtihad himself. Now, what are the conditions when you follow a madhab of one of the scholars who you ask? What are the conditions? First of all, the first condition is that you must believe that no one is infallible from error outside of the Prophet ﷺ. So even though you're going to take the fatwa from that individual, you must know and believe in your heart that he's not infallible, and perhaps he gave you a fatwa which is incorrect. He made ijtihad and is incorrect. Likewise, the second condition is that if the truth becomes apparent to you that it went against what you were told, then you must follow the truth in that matter, irrespective of who said that. And likewise, you should understand that there is no there is no wala and bara upon a person following your madhab. And this is something which is very important. If a situation occurs to me, for instance, let us say, or occurs to any Muslim, let's say a situation occurs to a Muslim, not a specific Muslim. That Muslim, he has a situation where he can't have children, okay? So he seeks a fatwa from a scholar who he thinks will give him a fatwa from the Quran and the Sunnah. Is it permissible for him to seek like the modern medical means, okay, regarding like artificial insemination? All right, and that scholar says it's permissible, or the scholar might say to him it's impermissible. It doesn't really matter. We're just illustrating a case here. Now, one cannot then make wala and bara upon that ijtihad if another scholar gave a different opinion regarding the matter. Okay, this is something very important. Likewise, if that ruling doesn't apply to you specifically, because either you're not married or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you and your spouse and you're having children, right? Then that issue, the ruling, doesn't affect you. So for you yourself, you cannot make wala and bara upon that matter itself also, because it doesn't concern you in the first place. So here's where people make two errors, the common Muslims, okay? When you ask a fatwa regarding a certain matter regarding your problem, a nazila which has occurred to you, okay, and somebody gives you a fatwa, and let's say another shaykh has given a fatwa regarding that matter but in a different way, one cannot make wala and bara upon the opinion that he has heard, because he's ignorant, and he's making taqleed here for the fatwa which has come to him. He doesn't know whether the one that was giving him the fatwa is more correct or the other one. Well, how is he to know? If he knew, he wouldn't have asked the question in the first place. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? So if you go to a scholar and you ask him, well, Sheikh, me and my wife, we've been trying for a number of years, we can't have children. Is it permissible for us to do artificial insemination? And he says, nah, it's jazz. Okay? And another person asked some other Sheikh who said it's impermissible. And these two people happen to meet. Can they now start arguing and say, no, well, the fatwa that I got is the correct fatwa? Of course not, because neither of them know which fatwa is the truer fatwa, because had they known, they wouldn't have asked in the first place. And likewise, let us say there's a person who the issue doesn't apply to him, because he's not married in the first place, nor it applies to him in the sense that he is not having problems with having children or something like that. Is he allowed then to make wala and bara upon the issue and take a side of that issue? No, he's not. Okay? And if one applies just that principle, I would think a lot of the differences between the brothers would be raised. Would you agree? Okay. Now, so likewise, part of that, we should understand that an ijtihad, the ability to give a religious ruling, is not required upon the whole ummah. Many brothers, misunderstand, especially brothers who want to adhere to the Sunnah. They think that because they adhere to the Sunnah, they have to become scholars. And they think that everybody in the ummah must be a scholar, and that in actuality is not true. How many companions did the Prophet ﷺ have? Does anybody know? Huh? 120,000, approximately 120,000. Okay. Does anybody know how many of them we have records that they gave fatwa? Well, there were 7 major ones who gave fatwa, but in total, about 105. So imagine, out of 120,000 people who were the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, 105 were the only ones who gave fatwa. I mean, that shows you that, you know, the issue of ijtihad, the issue of giving a fatwa, is something which is not something which everybody can aspire to, have the ability to, and it's not something which everybody must feel that it's required for him to do. Unlike hadith, right? The number of companions who related hadith upon the Prophet ﷺ are how many? Thousands, you know what I'm saying? Maybe there's 6,000 or something like that in total. So, you know, why? Because what's the difference between giving a fatwa and relating a hadith? When a person is relating a hadith, he's just transmitting what he heard from the Prophet ﷺ. He's just conveying. But when a person is giving a fatwa, right, he's now deducing a ruling based upon that hadith, and not everybody has that ability. Likewise, it is required for us to not follow a scholar in his error. Umar ibn Khattab has said, as reported by Ad-Darimi, that 3 matters destroy the religion: the slip of the scholar, the argumentation of the hypocrite, and leaders who are astray. And likewise, from that, when a scholar does make a mistake, it is not permissible for us to find fault with that scholar, but rather we should know that if a scholar makes an error in his ijtihad, he's between 1 and 2 rewards when he makes an ijtihad. As the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by Bukhari and Muslim, that when the judge makes a judgment, if he's correct in his judgment, he will have 2 rewards, and if he's correct, he will have 1 reward. Now, we should know, though, that when scholars do make errors in their opinions, it is not permissible for us to follow, you know, the errors of the scholars in the sense that we apply them. You know, a lot of Muslims, what they do, especially today, they try to find out, you know, in every single opinion, they try to find out a scholar who says that it's permissible, and they all do all those things. Okay, so you know, like for instance, you find this, you know, always question. For instance, a man comes and visits, an imam comes to a masjid and visits that masjid, and the people will ask him about riba. Is riba permissible? And he'll say it's haram. You know, and the people, they don't want to hear that it's haram. So what they'll do is they'll wait for the next imam to come, right, and they'll ask him the same question. So they finally find somebody who says it's permissible, so they'll follow that. And then they'll do that with music, and then they'll do that with eating foods, and they'll do that over and over with all the issues that concern them. The Salaf used to say that if you were to take the license of every single scholar, you would gather with you in all evil in you. And so one cannot follow the mistakes, try to follow all the mistakes, all the licenses given by the scholars, because then one would gather all evil within him. Likewise, sometimes you find a scholar who might do an act which is an act of bid'ah. What is our position regarding a scholar who does an act of bid'ah? Do we cancel him because of that? Of course not, we do not, but rather we still recognize his knowledge, his jihad, his effort for Islam, and we do not cancel his good deeds, but rather we have justice and we have moderation towards him. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, O you who believe, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kunu qawwamina lillah, be forthright with Allah, shuhada bil qist, you know, bear witness justly. And likewise we find the scholars of Islam, like Imam al-Zahabi said, and one of we find the scholars of Islam, like Imam al-Zahabi said, and one of his statements, that you might find a great scholar who has many correct opinions and much knowledge and, you know, great intelligence, and one knows his piety and his and people follow him. However, he makes mistakes. Allah will forgive his mistakes. We do not consider him astray. We do not cancel him. We do not forget his good deeds. Yes, we do not follow him in his bid'ah, as Zahabi says, or in his mistake, but rather we hope that he repents from that. And so therefore, this is the position regarding that. And likewise, if a scholar writes a book, which a book has some good and some evil in it, some sunnah and some bid'ah in it, we also judge the book in the same manner as we judge individuals. We take what is good in the book and we leave that which is incorrect in the book. And there are many examples to that from the statements of the scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah and others. And at the same time, however, we should warn the general population and the new student of knowledge, the one who has his mind is entrained to not follow or read those books that have a mixture of good and evil into it, because he would not have the knowledge, or the common person would not have the ability to distinguish between what's and wrong in those matters. So we come to stick to books which are, basically all correct, knowing that, of course, that there's no book which is perfect except for Allah's book, Azza wa Jal. And finally, what is the responsibility that the scholars have towards their ummah? I mean, if this is the responsibility the ummah have towards their scholars, do the scholars have a responsibility towards the ummah? Yes, indeed, they have a great responsibility, and that responsibility is that they must fulfill the covenant which Allah has taken from them, as mentioned in the Quran, that they spread the knowledge that they have and they do not conceal it. And they do not sell their knowledge for a paltry price in this world like the Jewish rabbis did with their knowledge. And that sort of concludes that section. Should we take the next section, or should we ask questions regarding scholars and position towards them? Our Amir left, so we have a stage, we have no Amir now, huh? So, Fahim, you want to sit up here for that whole time? Well, somebody has to follow the way it is. So play it. Yes, brother. So.
Just going back on the Imam, I mean, I'm in England, I have no Imam, so what should I do, and who should I look to? And also, for the Muslim countries, what should they do? And, I should have an Imam, where is he, if I haven't got one?
No, but the brothers, for instance, in this case, I mean, I asked Ibn Uthaymeen once this many years ago. Huh? So, what is responsible here is that the Muslims should not be without some sort of leadership. So let's say you belong to a certain community. You go to a certain masjid, and that masjid has an imam, or you belong to some sort of society, you belong to some sort of, organization, they have some sort of leader in that organization. I mean, he tries to fulfill as much of the responsibilities as possible, as can be done in that situation, for the Muslims who are part of that. And the same thing with the Muslims who are in Muslim countries. Those that have legitimate rulers are part of them. They have to obey the legitimate rulers and try to fill what the legitimate rulers fail to fulfill. And those who have illegitimate rulers should try themselves to fulfill as much of the Sharia as they can until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes their affair. An Islamic ummah can be founded by jihad and capability, and hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that you can't revolt against Muslim leadership only if they forbid you prayers in mosques. Could you please explain this? Yes, I mean, because prayer is considered to be the distinguishing factor between Iman and Kufr, between faith and unbelief. So the Prophet ﷺ said, so long as they establish the prayer amongst you, meaning so long as they establish Islam amongst you, so long as they do not establish unbelief amongst you. But however, though, even if they were to establish unbelief amongst the Muslims, like the Muslims who live under, let's say previously like under communist regimes or currently under socialist regimes and so forth, here the revolt is only if they have the ability to change it without resulting in a greater evil. So that's the point that should be understood. The Islamic Ummah can be founded by jihad and capability. No, the Islamic Ummah is only founded by jihad and capability, not can be. The Prophet ﷺ, how do we refer to the Prophet ﷺ's life? I mean, what's the word we use in Arabic? Seerah, okay? And if you read the books of the Shafi'i scholars, they refer to Kitab al-Jihad as Kitab al-Siyah, okay, which is a plural of the word Sirah, because the Prophet ﷺ's whole life was jihad, okay, but the jihad of the Prophet ﷺ had different ways of manifesting it. In Mecca it was by the tongue, and in Medina it was by the hand. So the Ummah of Muhammad ﷺ is only established by jihad. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, indeed I was sent with the sword between the hands of the hour until Allah is worshipped alone. And the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, that's in Abu Dawud and Ahmed, the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith that I have been commanded to fight humanity until they testify that there is none worthy of worship but Allah and Muhammad, and that I am His messenger. And this is founded in the Sahih Muslim. So the Ummah is only established through jihad. Naam.
I go to Malaysia quite a lot, and a lot of the scholars there obviously follow the strategy. And really they speak against what they call the Wahhabi. Should I just ignore it, respect them? How should I do that?
Well, I mean, we should understand that the Ash'aris in certain aspects are on the Sunnah. They have agreed to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So in those matters, when they make an elucidation of the creed of the people of the Sunnah, For instance, if they talk about the rank of the Prophet's companions and respect to that, one should, agree and this is truth. However, though, if they make, interpretation of certain of Allah's attributes and consider them to be figurative, then in those matters they have left the sunnah and one does not follow them. But at the same time, if they are scholars, men of piety and knowledge, they still have a certain rank which must be observed. You see what I'm saying? They still must be shown the respect, but still praise behind them and so forth. But in what they do, which is incorrect, one leaves.
If you have an imam and he only applies part of the Sharia, so that it falls to the rest of the Muslims to apply the rest of the Sharia.
If they can, and if it doesn't result in a greater fitna.
So what about things like the hudud? They can't establish the hudud if the ruler isn't that.
No, there's no evidence that you cannot establish the hudud if the ruler is not. The hudud primarily belong to whom? To the Imam of the Muslims, or he who the Imam of the Muslims has established as his na'ib, his representative. Okay, because obviously the Imam of the Muslims, while at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, a small community, he himself could make sure and oversee the applying of all the hudud. Now, even if there was a Khalif of the Muslims, could the Khalif of the Muslims himself oversee the applying of hudud for 1 billion people? Obviously not. So his representatives would see that. And likewise, there are certain punishments where the Sharia has allowed, like for instance, the master to apply certain punishments upon his slave. This is in the books of fiqh. But the rule that you cannot apply the hudud unless the imam there's not a truth to this, and there's an evidence which even shows opposite to that, which I can't recollect in this matter. Perhaps somebody might remind me. And moreover, again, it's the issue: will the greater evil occur? Now, in most places in the world, where the people to apply the hudud themselves would result in a greater evil. So this is why you would want to be able to do it. So the principle of Sharia. Yeah. What are the characteristics of a person who can make ijtihad? Well, the ulama have different regarding the person, the characteristics. If you look at the usul al-fiqh, regarding the person who can make ijtihad from those thousand in number, and you have to know which hadith are weak and which hadith are strong. You have to know al-nasikh and al-mansukh, that which has been the abrogating text, and that which has been abrogated. He has to know the Arabic language in order for him to correctly understand these matters. These are some essential conditions that he must have. And a person might have the ability to make an ijtihad in one subject, but not have the ability to make ijtihad in another subject, because ijtihad is something which is divisible. So therefore a person can have the ability to make ijtihad in certain topics, but not in other topics. Yeah.
What is the reason ruler that makes something that is halal, halal, vice versa? For example, like the ruler is outside
without getting to specifics, because when you say a ruler in Palestine, it's we have to identify exactly what we're talking about in this matter. Okay. As far as ruling about peace process, I gave a lecture this morning. We're getting the Islamic ruling regarding that. So, and regarding making something halal haram, making something haram halal, right? This is kufr, and it's major kufr in general. Okay, and so therefore the ruling regarding that type of ruler should be removed. If you taking your words at face value that he's making something halal haram, he's making something haram halal, but if he's judging outside of what Allah has sent down in a single issue or a few issues while his overall adherence to Sharia, then in this case one still has to show him obedience, but not obey him in those matters. What stand should be held when a scholar warns against or criticizes the works of another scholar? Well, unless you're a scholar yourself, how are you to know that the one who is warning or the one who is criticizing is correct or incorrect? If your taqleed of him would just be based upon your desires, right? In that matter. Unless there's an ijma' of the ummah. Okay? Like for instance, I'll give you an example on ijma' of the ummah. When Al-Khomeini was alive, the ummah as a whole criticized him. You found people from every single persuasion of the Islam, irrespective of their method, irrespective of their nationality or their locale, criticizing him. Irrespective of their da'wah group, criticizing him, calling him an unbeliever. So this was something where there was the ijma' of the ummah regarding that. But as far as the differences regarding scholars, I mean, unless you're a scholar yourself or a very strong student of knowledge, you really have no knowledge to distinguish between these matters, and so you're taking this stance or that stance is really just following your desires. Because this appeals to you or that appeals to you for whatever reason. Because you don't have, and it's really surprising that brothers take, these positions when they don't read Arabic. So they really don't know what is being criticized or why it's being criticized or to the degree which is being criticized. This is just following of desires.
Actually, I was going to ask a question, but this relation to that, how do you protect against this?
By sticking to that, I think we have a section about unity and not being differing. But in general, by sticking to that which is required upon you, and not engaging yourself in that which is not required upon you. I mean, for instance, when a scholar, refutes another scholar regarding some matter, okay, or criticizes a scholar regarding some matter, one just does not get himself involved in that matter. There is nothing that a single scholar will produce that you cannot find in another book or another teaching or something, by sticking to that which is required upon you. Learning your deen, making your relations closer to Allah, strengthening your family, strengthening your relations between his brothers and so forth. I mean, there's so much room to work there.
The next question was if there's ikhtilaf among the scholars, which is the most knowledgeable that we know.
The question is, how are you going to determine who's the most knowledgeable?
That's my question. What actually defines the most knowledgeable scholar?
Well, yeah, the people of knowledge can distinguish that one scholar is more knowledgeable than the other. Because they have knowledge, and so they're able, just like a doctor. I mean, don't the doctors amongst themselves say that he is, like, for instance, the chief surgeon of a certain thing? I mean, how did they elect the person as the chief surgeon? Because as medical doctors, they believe that his skill in surgery is greater than the other skills. They nominate him as the chief surgeon or of this ward or whatever. Now, the scholars amongst themselves, when they say that, for instance, Imam al-Bukhari had greater fiqh than Imam Muslim, well, how do they know that? Well, because they're scholars, and comparing Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, they found that Imam Bukhari has stronger fiqh than Imam Muslim. Now, for a person who is not a scholar of hadith, how is he going to tell that Imam Bukhari's fiqh is greater than Imam Muslim's fiqh? He doesn't know. And for him to take a position either this way or that way is an error, especially if the issue is an issue of controversy. You see what I'm saying? And there's not a matter in this religion which is required upon you. Wajib aini, which is a required upon you, an individual obligation, to which you'll find this type of differences of opinions regarding. The difference will be matters of ijtihad, which might not even affect you in the first place. You see what I'm saying?
Stand by that. Another scholar was to say this is the more knowledgeable scholar. It is because that more knowledgeable scholar would be known. And some people are saying that, you only say that because this person is a man or this person, of a certain government or something. And there are more people out there who do not put themselves up as such.
But I mean, the person who concurs that this person is the most knowledgeable, and the person who says that person is not the most knowledgeable, unless they are scholars themselves, unless they see the breadth of scholarship in the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how do they know that? I mean, how do they know that? I mean, it's just by hearsay, right? You trust somebody told you that and you accept it. Especially if a person doesn't read Arabic, right? I mean, how does he know that? I mean, there's no evidence to that point. It's just like when you say, for instance, that a certain scholar is the most knowledgeable scholar in Arabic grammar today, for example. Well, unless you're a grammarian of great scholarship, right? How would you know that he's the strongest grammarian in the world today? And unless you've studied all the works of all the contemporary grammarians, how would you know that? You wouldn't. But you just heard that from somebody who you trust and you assume to be correct. So then to make wala and bara upon it and to make it a point of contention or argumentation obviously is something which is from Satan. It's not from Islam. When you say greater evil, what do you mean? An evil, of course, a munkar is whatever is regarded as objectionable by the Sharia or by reason, by common sense. So a greater evil or greater munkar would be something which results to a greater evil in the Sharia, or something which is known by common sense to result into a greater corruption. And like an example, Ibn Taymiyyah would not apply the hudud upon the drunk Mongol soldiers for drinking wine. And when his companions would want to apply the hudud on the drunk, even though they would apply it upon drunk Muslims, but he wouldn't apply it upon the drunk Mongolians. Why? Because he said that when the Mongolian is drunk, he is therefore, in a stupor, he's not able to kill Muslims. But when he's awake, right, and when he's not awake, when he's sober, right, he's able, then he has his sword, which he can then, kill Muslims. So which is a greater evil, for a person to be drunk or for a person to kill another Muslim? Obviously to kill another Muslim. How do we know that? By the Sharia, and also by reason. It stands that to protect loss of life is greater than to preserve sanity.
Before you actually ask someone, because there's an hadith here, and reported by, Rasulullah said that the son of Adam, part of his happiness, he actually didn't pray Salat al-Istikhara, and actually part of his mystery, he should commit, which is related by authentic.
But
what I'm saying is, if someone is in confusion, which is obviously first, look for the guidance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, obviously, speak the knowledge, not just going straight to the knowledge of God. I'm putting forward this question because we're talking about regarding somebody whether they know Arabic or they don't know Arabic. Of course, I know it's a guidance, and I will guide you.
That's true, Jazakallah khairan. But at the same time, there's no guarantee that when a person does Salat al-Istikhara, that Allah necessarily will answer his prayer, right?
Well, that's the guarantee because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't be somebody who's seeking his knowledge. That's right. The guarantee put the trust in Allah. That's guarantee.
No.
100%.
I agree with you. It is, if you put your trust truly in Allah and you have no other motivation, only seeking the guidance from Allah Azza wa Jalla, Allah would never send his servant astray.
One example of this, what happened one day I read the Sunnah regarding Salah. And when I went to the mosque, I started to hear people praying different. So then I asked Allah, how do you pray? He showed me the dream. Exactly what I read.
No.
You understand? And it was in English, it wasn't in Arabic.
No.
And I asked him.
That's all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all to that which is correct.
So that would be
No, Jazakallah khair for the nasib. Is obedience and assistance to a Muslim ruler still required even if the ruler does not apply a common way of life for fellow Muslims? I don't know what the question means by common way of life. What does a common way of life mean here? Whoever wrote the question could ask or rewrite it so I can understand it. Bayan, continue, because we only have an hour. Okay, so let's now take the next section regarding unity and not differing amongst ourselves. The first point we should understand is that people are generally two categories, believers and unbelievers. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in Surah Al-Taghabun, وَالَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ فَمِنْكُمْ كَافِرٌ وَمِنْكُمْ مُؤْمِنٌ. He's the one who has created you. There are amongst you he who's a kafir or unbeliever, and amongst you he who's a believer. So, in other words, people are two types, unbelievers and believers. And likewise, for this reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden the believers to differ in regard matters of religion and to return back into unbelief. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in Surah Al-Baqarah, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا فَبَعِثَ اللَّهُ النَّبِيِّينَ مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. That humanity was a single ummah, and then Allah sent the prophets as giving glad tidings and warnings. So in the ayah there is an ellipsis. There is something which is not mentioned in the ayah specifically, and this is from the Arabic balagha, or eloquence of the Arabic speech, that the Arabs, when they speak, they have such a high eloquence that they can refer to something and not explicitly mention it, but yet it is understood. So this verse says humanity was a single ummah, and Allah sent the prophet giving good glad tidings and warning because humanity differed. Humanity was a single ummah, they differed, and so then Allah, because they differed, He sent the prophets giving glad tidings and warning. That's it, I thought somebody said something. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likewise has commanded us to hold on to his robe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on to the rope of Allah, all of you, and do not differ. And so for this reason, differences is something which is evil. It is something which has nothing good to differ in. However, though, with that, we should understand that differences are not all the same type. I mean, even though differences are evil and Allah has forbidden us to differ and to be at variance, right? Differing of opinions and statements and actions are not of the same category. And there are different degrees to that. And we shouldn't, group them all into one category. There are differences which lead a person outside of Islam. Like, for instance, when a person, in the time of the Sahaba, when there were certain Arab tribes who differed regarding the incumbency of paying zakat, the second, the required charity that every Muslim must pay. When they differed regarding that, this difference led them to unbelief, apostasy. Likewise, there are differences of opinion, differences and variance, which leads a person not to unbelief, but just leads him to heresy or to bid'ah, innovation. And like, for instance, like those who have differed regarding a believer who sinned. Is he, because of committing a major sin, is he an unbeliever or not, like the Khawarij claim. This is a difference, a variance which leads to bid'ah, does not lead to unbelief. And then there's a difference of opinion which is based upon matters of ijtihad, where the scholars have made an ijtihad, but this ijtihad clearly goes against the Quran and the Hadith. It might be because the scholar forgot that ayah or that Hadith at the time when he gave his ruling. He might have misunderstood the ayah and the Hadith or interpreted it in an incorrect manner. He might think that this ayah and Hadith is opposed by a stronger evidence, so he follows the stronger evidence. He might think that it was abrogated. So in this type of thing, this type of mujtahid, obviously he will have a single reward, and we should find some sort of excuse, but we do not follow him in his error. And sometimes there are other matters of ijtihad which are based solely on ijtihad, and there is no evidence which shows this opinion is stronger than the other opinion. But basically it's just a situation of trying to understand the current events and trying to weigh the balance between the goods and the benefits and the harms in that matter. No one can tell which opinion is the best opinion in that matter until after the event happens, and then if that course of action leads to good, then one might assume that the other course of action would have led not to good. You know what I'm saying? Or if one course of action taken leads to something harmful, one could assume that the other course of action would have led to something better, but maybe it would have even led to something which is even worse. So one cannot here be certain. And this is where a matter where one is not allowed to take a position of variance and to become fanatical upon that position, and rather one should try to lift this differences and to unite the hearts of the believers upon that which they agree upon. Now, so then what is our responsibility when we find differences? Well, our first responsibility is that we should adhere to the book and the sunnah and the ijma' of the ummah. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, commanded us to hold on to the rope of Allah, which is His book, His sunnah, and the ijma'. You know, the religion, the most important matters of religion, there's no difference between the scholars regarding that matter. Like Tawheed, there's no difference that we have to worship Allah and we're forbidden to worship other than Allah. There's no difference that Allah is perfect and all the false deities have imperfection regarding them. Okay. There's no difference of opinion that there's 5 required prayers to be prayed in the day. There's no difference of opinion that you should fast the month of Ramadan. There's no difference of opinion that eating and drinking breaks the fast and sexual relations. There's no difference of opinion that you should make Hajj to Mecca, you don't make Hajj to Geneva, for instance. These are matters which there is no doubt amongst the Ummah. There's no doubt amongst the Ummah that Allah has made lawful buying and selling but has forbidden riba. That He has made lawful marriage but He has forbidden zina. And these are matters which are the great matters of religion, that if we just stick to them, right, and we hold firm to them and call humanity to them, we become the most unified ummah on earth. And the other matters, the evidences differ in terms of the strength, and some of the matters are merely matters of ijtihad. And so therefore, in these cases where the evidences differ, we should refer back to the book and the sunnah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, وَمَا اخْتَلَفْتُمْ فِيهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَحُكْمُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ, that whenever you differ or at variance in any matter, its judgment goes back to Allah. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ, if you differ regarding anything, فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, refer it back to Allah and the Messenger. إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر, if you truly believe in Allah and the last day. ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا, that is better for you, and it is a better end result for your affairs. And likewise, part of that is if we return a matter back to Allah, meaning to the Quran and to the Prophet ﷺ, meaning his Sunnah after the Prophet ﷺ's death, it means that we should be pleased with Allah's judgment. Because if you refer back to Allah and His Messenger, you find that that judgment was not the one that you had initially taken or initially opined, then you should be pleased with Allah's judgment, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ, that they do not believe until they judge you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that which they have differed amongst themselves. And likewise, we should avoid following our desires, and we should avoid transgression against others. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has condemned over in the Quran, those people who follow their desires and those who show transgression against one another due to their desires. Because what happens is when a person follows his desire, he wants his desire to be implemented, so that he transgresses against the fellow Muslims in that matter. Now, when an issue occurs that a person differs, or a group of Muslims differ in a matter of ijtihad, what should the people's position be to the opposing opinion? What should their stance be? Well, their stance should be that they should acknowledge that the other people have the right to have that opinion, even though they do not have that opinion themselves, unless a clear text in the Quran and Sunnah shows one to be correct. And this is Ibn Taymiyyah says that for this reason the companions agreed regarding matters in which they differed with. Every party concurred that the other party had a right to hold that opinion, which they held at variance. And then they had a right to act according to their ijtihad. And these were in issues, Ibn Taymiyyah says, acts of worship, issues regarding marriage, issues regarding inheritance, issue regarding the distribution of rights, issues regarding politics, and other matters. And likewise he said that the Prophet's companions differed in matters of belief, in aqidah. Like, does the person who has deceased, can he hear the voice of the living? And will the person who has died, will he be tormented due to the crying of his relatives? And did the Prophet ﷺ see Allah with his own eyes before death? And even though they differed in these matters of belief, they still were unified, and they still had love for one another. Likewise, it is forbidden to make a reject or against a matter that a person has made an ijtihad which does not go against a matter which is clear in the Quran or in the Sunnah or the Ijma'. And for this reason, one should not take the position that, for instance, somebody makes an ijtihad and there's not a clear verse or a clear hadith or a clear Ijma' which shows this position to be wrong. One cannot, reject that person's ijtihad, but one must accept that that's a viable opinion. And again, to quote Ibn Taymiyyah regarding a type of transaction or a type of corporation called Sharikatul Abdan, the Muslims have differed whether this type of corporation is permitted. And Ibn Taymiyyah said, it was asked, can somebody then who does not think that this is permitted, can he prohibit the people from doing this type of corporation? Because he is, in his viewpoint, this is not permitted. He said he's not permitted to do that. Nor is his rights are allowed in matters of ijtihad which have no clear text from the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma', or something that's similar, to prevent somebody from holding the other opinion. And this is what the scholars are upon in all and the Muslims themselves in all the major areas of the Muslims. And that's why for the judge, he is not able to change the ruling of another judge, okay? Nor can the scholar or the mufti command the people to follow his opinion in these issues, okay? And what does he mean by the judge cannot change the ruling of another judge? For instance, you might have a Muslim city, okay? Let's say Cairo, since we said there were, let's say in a city like Cairo where there's millions of Muslims, you might find many Sharia judges, okay? And one Sharia judge might take a case might be presented to him, and he might give an opinion, he might give a judgment in that case according to his ijtihad, which another scholar who has maybe another method gives another type of ijtihad. Can that other scholar then, undo, that other ruling? No, that ruling still is enforced. And this is the Sunnah of the Muslims. And then Ibn Taymiyyah says And the same thing in terms of fatwas. You cannot force people to follow the fatwa, somebody to follow this fatwa, and so forth. And then Ibn Taymiyyah gives an incident. Says this is why when Harun al-Rashid took the opinion of Malik, that he asked Malik to make the people follow his Muwatta in these issues. Muwatta, Imam Malik prevented al-Rashid from doing that. I mean, Harun al-Rashid wants to unify the Muslims upon a single method. So he said, okay, Imam Malik, you're the most knowledgeable person, you're the Imam of Ahl al-Madinah, you've written the Muwatta, so let's make the Muwatta the book which every single Muslim must follow. Okay, Imam Malik said no, and he replied, the Prophet's companions, spread out the different lands, and each people took from the knowledge what reached them. And so when a person, was to write a book, one time Imam Malik was questioned regarding writing a book concerning differences. So Imam Malik said, do not call it the book of differences, but call it the book of allowances. In other words, that he felt that whether this is Malik or somebody else, I mean, it's not clear from the text in front of me, but the point is that one scholar said, a person wants to write a book of differences, like this scholar says the opinion is this, and this scholar says the opinion is this, and the differences between the scholars. The other scholar said, don't call it the book of differences, but call it the book of allowances, meaning that you can follow this opinion or you can follow that opinion. You're allowed to do such like that. And for this reason, that's why some of the scholars have said that their ijma' is a decisive proof. I mean, when the scholars agreed upon something, it's a decisive proof which we cannot go against. But their difference is a wide mercy. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz used to say, Ibn Taymiyyah quotes, it does not make me happy that I see the companions of the Messenger of Allah that I see that the companions of the Messenger of Allah do not differ, because if they gather upon a single opinion, whoever goes against that is astray. But rather, if they differ and a person takes this opinion, another person takes this opinion, then it means there's some room in the matter, and this is why this is where Umar ibn Aziz used to find this more pleasurable. So Umar ibn Aziz was considered the first mujaddid of the Islamic Ummah, and he was a scholar and also the ruler. He used to say, and he was from the Tabi'in, and he used to say, I don't find it, what doesn't make me as happy is to see that the companions of the Prophet, unite upon an opinion. Because if they unite upon an opinion, that means you have to just do it that way. Because if you do it different than that way, you'll be astray. What makes me really happy is when the companions of the Prophet ﷺ used to differ. It means that the people that have room to follow either of the opinions, and so therefore a person would not be astray. And for this reason, Malik and others used to say amongst the scholars, or other than Malik amongst the scholars would say, that the faqih, the scholar, is not the one who compels the people to follow his opinion. When you find a person compelling people to follow his opinion, he's not a scholar. He's not a faqih, as the scholars have said. Then Ibn Taymiyyah continues by saying that for this reason, the scholars who have authored books regarding commanding good and forbidding evil, from the scholars who follow Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, and others, have said that in these matters of ijtihad, one cannot change that matter by the hand, and nobody can require people to follow that person. But rather a person may speak by the evidences of knowledge. And if it shows to him that the other opinion is, one of the opinions is more correct, he should follow that. And whoever follows the other opinion, one cannot reject that. And this has many examples, like the people, and he gives many examples in fiqh regarding that. So what Ibn Taymiyyah says that, the scholars from Imam Shafi'i's method, even when they wrote books about public commanding good and public forbidding of evil, because in Islam there's something known as al-hisba, when you have people who are set by the state to publicly forbid evil. Okay, so let us say, and it's an issue where the scholars have differed. Is it permissible then for those people who have been set up to make public, virtue, fulfill public virtue and forbid public evils? Can they compel people, in this case, to follow a single opinion among the opinions? If there's a difference of opinion, no. But all they can do is they can explain what they feel is the strongest opinions. They have no right to reject the others who take other opinions. So let's say that there are certain Muslims let's find a difference of opinion where the difference of opinion is very, which goes back. Yeah, like eating meat, for instance. Okay, and I know in Britain it's a little bit different, but just in general, eating the meat of the unbeliever, which is slaughtered. Okay, so understand which is slaughtered, but the unbeliever has not mentioned the name of Allah upon that meat. Okay, that issue, okay, is an issue of difference of opinion which goes back to the Prophet's companions. that is it required for the kafir to say Allah's name when slaughtering the meat in order for us to eat it? Or is it just required for him just to fulfill the obligation of slicing, of cutting the animal, and slaughtering it? Okay, the companions of the Prophet differed in this issue. So now, if there was an Islamic state, would the Islamic state and the people who are to make al-hisbah, to enjoy public good, enjoy the good publicly, would they have a right then to go to a certain restaurant that might be serving meat which is brought from a non-Muslim country but is slaughtered, okay, and close that restaurant down and beat the people who are eating there because they hold the opinion that that meat is not permissible? No. Nor would they be able to reject them. This is a different opinion which goes back to the Sahaba, okay? But if there was a restaurant which was feeding people pork, okay, or if it was a restaurant which was feeding people meat which was not slaughtered, okay, there's no difference between the ulama or meat which has been sacrificed to other than Allah. There's no difference between the ulama based upon the text in the Quran that all this is forbidden to eat. So they could stop the people from selling this meat. They could prevent them from serving this meat, right? And they could, punish people who went and ate this meat according to the jurisdiction that they're given. And I hope that clarifies that issue. Is there any questions we can now take? For instance, we have regarding these last matters, and maybe we can do one section, more sections. Okay, the brother says, Assalamu alaikum, alaikum assalam. My question is, how can we bring the non-believers into Islam if the Muslims are doing the same thing as the kafir does? Well, this is a problem. Ibn al-Qayyim refers to these people as people who, they say, come to the doors of paradise, and when the person reaches the door of paradise, they push him away and say, don't come, look at my deeds, And so Ibn al-Qayyim says, what's that effect? So obviously a person who does things which the kafir does and causes the person to dislike Islam or think Islam is hypocritical because of that, obviously the person has a great sin, and this is part of, preventing the following of the path of Allah. Now, does that mean that a person should not give da'wah unless he is, sinless? No. Does it mean that a person should not give da'wah regarding that which he does not do? No. The correct opinion is that he should give da'wah, even if he doesn't do it, because by giving da'wah, that is a way which is a prod to him, not to fall into that sin. But at the same time, we should remember that to do what we do not preach and to do opposite to what we say is a great sin, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned great punishment regarding that. Is it permissible to pray behind a Sufi sheikh who believes the Prophet Muhammad did not die and believes in other things in Sufi Aqidah? It's not a question of him being Sufi or not. If the person of bid'ah, his bid'ah has reached unbelief, then it's forbidden to pray behind him. So let's say a person who says there's a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad, it's forbidden to pray behind him. A person who says that it's permissible to pray to other than Allah or to slaughter to other Allah, it's forbidden to pray behind. A person who says that the Prophet Muhammad knows all and is like Allah in knowledge or in abilities also is an unbeliever, and it's forbidden to pray behind him.
We had a Shia brother came to the Shepherd's Bush once, and one of my brothers said, "Oh, I get out," and I said, "No, bring him in and let him pray with us." Because I was of the opinion that the only reason he's a Shia is the conditioning of his environment. Let's bring him into Islam. And we had a big argument. I mean, not physically or using bad manners, but we had a big intellectual argument. And I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'll talk to you later," kind of thing. And we brought the brother in, and he prayed. And whether his arms were up or down didn't matter. And I said, everyone sort of suddenly you came on my side. And I said, of course the munkar, everyone's divided. But, in those situations, I've got friends who were brought up, no religious knowledge at all. They'll tell you they're Shia. If you ask them what does it mean, it's Faqira. They don't know. So, can we bring people into Islam? Can we bring them, can they pray behind their imam? Can they pray behind their
Sure, of course. I mean, and the proof is what? That Ali said to the Khawarij, those heretics who the Prophet ﷺ warned against and said they were the dogs of the hellfire. And so when they stood up in the Masjid of Kufa, they said judgment belongs only to Allah. What did Ali respond to them? And he was on the minbar, and he was the Khalifa, and he was the Imam. He said, you have three rights upon us. That we do not prevent you from the masajid of the Muslims. That we do not prevent you your share of the booty so long as you participate in jihad with us, and that we do not begin in fighting you, raising our swords against you until you raise your swords against us. So they had, their bid'ahs, what I'm saying, and they publicly, said to Ali, we're not going to obey you anymore. And they declared their public, disobedience to Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was the Imam of the Muslims. And what did Ali say? Did Ali just say, well, look, you people are obviously, preparing for revolt, so I'm going to take the steps necessary now and send in my security forces and arrest you and, put you in jail and so forth? No. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, because the masjid belongs to Allah, they're Muslims, they're not unbelievers, they have a right to pray in the masjid. And likewise, at the same time, if they participate in jihad, they have the right of the booty, and likewise, until they openly, because their issue was the issue of revolt, until they openly started the revolt, Ali was not going to punish them until they actually did it. Yes, sir. Yes.
What's more that many groups point to advising many people see this division of the Muslim being unpractical. What do you guys think? And more importantly, would you work with any platforms?
Well, there's two issues here. Okay, there's issue of different organizations and groups. Like, for instance, you might find charity work. Okay, how many Muslim organizations do charity work? Many. Okay, can somebody reasonably say that it's required that there's only one charitable organization that tends to Muslims? No, because it's impossible to imagine that even a Muslim state would be able to take care of all the needs of the Muslims. So there are different charity organizations, and working and cooperating one for one another. This is something which is permissible and allowed by the Sharia. Okay. Now that you have different groups, each group having its own manhaj, its own way of da'wah unto Allah. Okay. Here it depends. If there's differences in ijtihad, okay, and they still observe regarding one another the rights of Allah, and they still have the brotherhood and so forth, and they don't make them following this group or that group an issue of wala and bara, where they treat the brothers from one group that differently they treat the brothers from a different group, then this is, this might have some permissibility in the Sharia. Okay, just like the different schools of thought, the different schools of legal schools of fiqh. Okay, legal schools of fiqh did appear amongst the Muslims, and you had people who went, for instance, studied under Shafi'i scholars, people studied under Maliki scholars, people studied under Hanbali scholars, and people studied under Hanafi scholars. But, in general, the Muslims realized that if you went to this school or to that school, all of these madhahib were basically upon the sunnah, and you shouldn't have taqleed to any one of them. And, scholars, especially the scholars of knowledge and piety, would then, switch. They would study under different scholars from different madhahib, but they felt they could benefit something. So here you have studying under Ibn Taymiyyah, who is a Hanbali, right? You find a number of Shafi'is coming to study under him. Among them is Al-Zahabi. Okay, among them is Al-Birzali, okay? Among them was Al-Mizzi, okay? Among them was Ibn Kathir. These were all Shafi'i scholars. They all studied under Ibn Taymiyyah Aqidah, and they were from his companions, okay? Yet Ibn Taymiyyah himself, a Hanbali scholar, studied under Al-Birzali, who was a Shafi'i scholar Hadith, who was a student in Aqidah. You see, this is the type of flexibility they had, okay? And likewise, amongst the Salaf, they used to pray behind one another. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whenever he used to pray behind Imam al-Shafi'i students, he used to do qanut with them in salah. Because the Imam would be doing qanut, he would do qanut, even though he used to consider that qanut in the Fajr prayer was abrogated, it was no longer from the Sunnah. Alright? So this is a type of flexibility they understood. So if the groups in da'wah are upon that, right, then that type of flexibility would be permitted. But if they're on the opposite, which unfortunately is the case, where each group considers itself to be the only group which is upon the truth and doesn't allow for the ijtihad of the others, and at the same time they treat Muslims who are outside the group with less rights than they treat those who are in the groups, irrespective of who is close to the truth, who is more pious, who is more knowledgeable, and that is something which is forbidden in religion, and that is part of the sectarianism. Now, whether would I participate with them? I would participate them in that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to, participate with our fellow Muslims. وَتَعَوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَتَعَوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded me and every single Muslim in the Quran that we should cooperate upon that which is birr and taqwa, and we should not cooperate upon that which is ithm, sinfulness, and transgression. So if Muslims are doing something which is righteousness, okay? I'll give you an example which I hope that probably won't be controversial, but you need to give an example. Let's say Jama'at al-Tabligh, okay? Now, I'm not a member of Jama'at al-Tabligh, and I never went out with Jama'at al-Tabligh, but let's say the brothers from Jama'at al-Tabligh established a masjid next to me. Now,
Maybe the two cars blocked the Jamaat. Two cars blocking the way for the neighbors.
Yes, there are two cars blocking the way. One is a blue car, Fiesta, and the other one is white Escort.
Right.
Could you remove it quickly? Because neighbors try to get through and it's blocking its way, please.
So if you got a blue Fiesta or a white Escort, please move the car. Now, where were we? We're talking about, Jama'at al-Tabligh, right. So let's say the brothers of Jama'at al-Tabligh opened a masjid in my area. This was the only masjid in there. Was I going to say, well, because I disagree with their Manhaj and Dawah, I'm not going to pray in that masjid? I'm not going to pray behind their imam? No, because the Jama'ah prayer is something which Allah has, commanded, and the Prophet ﷺ has commanded. Sunnah, like traveling for 40 days, okay? I don't feel that's in accordance with the Sunnah. Then I would not engage with them in that matter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them not to cooperate in that which is sinfulness and which is aggression. Alright? And inshallah I can clarify.
Does it say like Jama'at Islamic or invite the pastor to share that same time?
If the group was, to invite me to a matter and they were not going to put restrictions upon me, and the group was not a group of the flag which the group, or the banner, not the flag, the banner which that group carried was that they would say we are from Ahl Sunnah, right? I would hold them to that and I would go. But if the group was not a group of people of Sunnah, okay, and they were a group of the people of Bid'ah, like for instance the Shia, okay, or like for instance some of the Sufi groups, I would not participate. And it happened. I mean, when I was in the Beijing conference for the World Conference for Women in 1995, the Iranians delegation many times came to me and asked me if I could do an interview and talk about women in Islam, and so which they would show on television. So then I refused to do it because they raised the banner of Tashayya, right? And so therefore I would not want to be with them. But if a group of brothers, right, say, well, we're from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and we want to follow the Quran, we follow the Sunnah, we want to follow the way of the Salaf, and they don't publicly hold to a matter which is known to be a matter of bid'ah, which there's no difference of opinion upon, I would sit and give a lecture if they invited me to it, and hope that I could maybe teach them something, and of benefit, because they might have that bid'ah because out of ignorance, right? Is there a question? Yeah. Is it halal to work for a company which deals with riba? Is your earnings acceptable? In general, it's not halal to work in a company which deals with riba, but then which company does not deal with riba in all companies except for maybe a Muslim company, which, a very small Muslim company, but every single company deals with riba, right? Even universities, right? Even hospitals deal in riba in this country. So one would here, as long as his earnings does not come out of riba, then his earnings are halal, inshallah ta'ala, as long as he's not doing an act of riba with his earnings, and so long also that if he feels some portion of his earnings is from that, he should then give that away in charity, and ask Allah's forgiveness. Right, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy has not then obligated upon us that we are responsible for the source of how the money is given to us. I mean, if they pay you a wage for laying bricks, okay, and they tell you, I'm going to pay you $10 an hour for laying bricks, okay, and you go there every day and an 8-hour day, you lay your bricks, okay, and they pay you, $80 at the end of the day, or $400 at the end of the week, okay. Where they got the money from, that's not your responsibility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in mercy to us, right, has not made us responsible for that. Now, if you could find a company or a place where that the company was a Muslim company, did not deal in any riba whatsoever, and so they would give you your wage, and I mean, that's even the money's more pure, there's more blessing to it. Yes, brother.
Following that same example, for example, if you had a contract to work for a brewery,
right,
okay, and the laborers,
right.
Is that allowed?
This is very difficult over here because to say that it's allowable, because the brewery in and of itself there's nothing halal, in it.
Exactly. Okay, my second example was a bank.
Right.
Bank
right.
The bank same, if the bank gave you a contract to bring or to serve customers.
That's the same thing there, because this is an institution with everything in it is riba, like a casino, like or so forth. But for instance, let's say you were to lay the bricks for a company or a store. Okay, that store would sell things which are halal and which are haram in it.
So that's the obviously under different companies.
No.
From Orient and
Sure. I mean, that which is purely haram, in their business, everything which they do is haram. And to take any money from them is haram. But that which is, a mixture of halal and haram, then if you can take out the money which is haram, that's better. But if not, or if your job regarding that is not something which is doing haram, then there's no harm.
If you work in a bank, you say just let the council.
No, you should not work in the bank whatsoever. It's forbidden. No, I think we have 20 minutes, so let's try to do the last section about seeking knowledge, and then maybe we can take a few more questions afterwards, and then we'll. What time is it? 4:45. Okay, so we'll give time for the best make wudu. Okay, about seeking knowledge and how is one to seek knowledge. We discussed the merit of knowledge, and we mentioned, or we can mention the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, who the Prophet ﷺ said, is in Bukhari and Muslim, that he who Allah wills well for, He gives him fiqh in the religion. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, the best of you is he who learns the Quran and teaches it. And upon Ibn Mas'ud, the Prophet ﷺ said that there is no jealousy except for two matters: a man who Allah has given wealth, and so he spends it, fully in the truth, and a man who Allah has given wisdom, and so he judges by it and teaches it. And so therefore, knowledge is something which is praiseworthy, but there's different types of knowledge. There's a praiseworthy knowledge and there is a condemned knowledge. The praiseworthy knowledge is knowledge of the Quran, of the Sunnah, of the Ijma', what is needed to understand the Quran and the Sunnah, like Arabic grammar, like usul al-fiqh, like mustalah al-hadith, the regulations for knowing a hadith if it's authentic or not. And the knowledge which is condemned is like knowledge of, blameworthy knowledge, like knowledge of philosophy, knowledge of sorcery, knowledge of, for example, knowledge of the previous scriptures, like the Jewish rabbis who studied those scriptures and which have been changed and tampered over and over, things which have been abrogated. That type of knowledge is a condemned knowledge. Now, what are the and also a knowledge which is blameworthy is even if the knowledge is good in itself, but one seeks that knowledge in order to without a good intention, it becomes blameworthy knowledge. Or if one does not act upon that knowledge, it becomes blameworthy knowledge, even if that knowledge is good. So if a person learns the Quran and memorizes not to draw closer to Allah, but so somebody says that what a beautiful qari he is, or somebody learns the Quran and then does not act upon it, then this becomes blameworthy knowledge in his case, even though the knowledge of the Quran in itself is good. What are some of the qualities a person should have if he's seeking religious knowledge, Sharia knowledge? Well, first of all, that he should be a person of, a person who's a rational person, not a person who is given to irrationality, given to mood swings, given to following his desires and so forth. Likewise, an important quality that he has ikhlas, his intent is pure to Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that he who learns a knowledge which is sought to receive Allah's word, he only learns it in order to gain some sort of aspect of this world. He will not get the scent of paradise on the Day of Judgment. Likewise, part of learning knowledge is a quality that's required by a person who wants to learn knowledge, is that he has good appearance and good character. This is a matter which beautifies knowledge, and having good character and to have good behavior and good appearance also. Where does one begin in studying knowledge? The most important matter that a person should start with in learning knowledge is the Quran. And this is something which brothers neglect often. Learning the Quran on how to read it, recite it, learning the Quran in terms of memorizing it and its meanings is where we should begin in learning knowledge. And also in beginning in knowledge, we should also begin with the basics and then go to the details. One should not jump immediately into the matters like, what happens now. You have brothers immediately, you just took shahada and they say, well, so-and-so said such and such and so-and-so said such and such, and what is the ruling concerning this? One begins with the basics, and when he's perfected the basics, when he's mastered them, he then goes into the more complex details. Just like when you study mathematics in school, right? And when you were in the first grade, were they giving you advanced calculus in the first grade? No, they First, taught you how to add, right? And then after you got adding correct, okay, then they taught you how to subtract, and then they went to something different like multiplication, division, and then to, basic geometry and algebra, and then finally, if you go in your mathematics, you get into calculus and other matters like that. Likewise, one should select, and this is a problem, of course, for brothers who live in a non-Muslim country like us who live in the United Kingdom or the United States. One should select a sheikh who is not only knowledgeable, but he is what is known as a murabbi. He's one who can raise you, and likewise he is a man of piety and so forth. Because knowledge in Islam is not just knowing facts, okay, but knowledge, as the Salaf said, is fear of Allah, okay. And in order for you to gain that type of character, in order to gain that type of fear of Allah, you need a man to guide you, okay. You need an older figure to correct you when you're mistaken, to show you the correct way. Just like the same way your parents, right, raise you as a child. And when that is not available, then the knowledge that is obtained is often marred, and it's not beautiful as it's supposed to be. Likewise, one should pay attention to obtaining and reading the books of the well-known scholars of the people of Sunnah, who are known to have knowledge and piety, and who the Ummah has accepted their knowledge, like for instance Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Abdul Wahhab, Ibn Abdul Barr, Zahabi, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Hajar, Shawkani, and many others from previous days and from contemporary times. The Ummah has recognized these men as men of knowledge. One should pay attention to their works, their writings works. Now, in studying, should we get into what books you should study first, or it's not really necessary, huh? What do you think, You think so? Okay, fine. Okay, where does one begin, for instance, in studying Tawheed? Well, one should first begin, there's an essay which is known as a good place to study Tawheed. It's called Thalathat al-Usul, the Three Fundamentals, and I guess it's been translated with a commentary by Ibn Uthaymeen recently in the English language, so that's where one usually begins. And then afterwards, one begins with Al-Qawa'id al-Arba'a, the Four Principles. There's a short essay also by Ibn Abdul Wahhab, which is also translated in English, and Kashf al-Shubahat, Kitab al-Tawheed. These are some of the commentaries on Kitab al-Tawheed. This is a good place to start with in Aqidah. Then one can go to the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah, some of the preliminary writings like Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah, Al-Aqidah al-Hamawiyah, Al-Aqidah al-Tazmuriyah. These are some of the basic fundamental writings. The commentary on Tahawi's Creed also, which has been translated to English but unpublished until this time, but it's available in English. And then one can go to even the more complex works by Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, and other scholars. As far as fiqh, really the correct way to study fiqh is to initially to either adhere to a single sheikh or to adhere to a madhab. That's the correct way to get fiqh in this religion. And so, for instance, when he studies fiqh, he doesn't jump from book to book or from scholar to scholar, because he'll have different opinions and he won't be able to resolve them, and it'll lead to his confusion. For instance, the Hanbalis, which I'm somewhat familiar with, usually they start off by studying Umdat al-Fiqh by Ibn Qudama, and then when a person graduates from that book, he'll go to another book like Matan al-Zad, which has a commentary called Al-Rawd al-Murbi', and then after that he goes into Al-Kafi by Ibn Qudama, and then after that he goes into Al-Mughni. For instance, there's a certain, each madhab, each school of law has certain degrees in where you go through books of fiqh. And, that's similar to like studying medicine. I mean, when you go to medical school, right, what's one of the first things they teach you? Well, they teach you like the basics. They teach you like basic anatomy, right? They teach you maybe basic histology, basic embryology. I guess if there's any brothers here studying in medical school, he might be able to, list the first year courses, right? Basic microbiology, maybe a basic course in biochemistry and so forth, okay? It's only until like maybe the fourth or the fifth year, right, or you actually get into stuff like surgery or whatever. I mean, or maybe the second year. I'm not certain how it is, okay? I mean, you don't just start off as soon as you go into medical school the first day. They give you a body and say, cut. No, they teach you, basics to build upon that. And so such is, knowledge of fiqh is very complex, is very detailed. One must likewise do the same. But at the same time, when you say that you should study according to a method, it doesn't mean you should have taqleed regarding that. For instance, Ibn Abdul Wahhab said that if a person studies in a madhab according to any of the four madhabs, and then he finds a hadith which goes against his madhab, he should follow the evidence, and he should leave his madhab if the evidence becomes clear to him. And the scholars, I think the statements of the scholars that if the hadith is collected, it's my opinion, and you should not follow my hadith but follow the hadith. These various statements, I think the brothers are familiar with them. As far as tafsir, where does one begin with tafsir? Well, first one should begin with a preliminary tafsir. One of the good preliminary tafsirs is Ibn Sa'di's book on tafsir. Then, for instance, Ibn Kathir's tafsir is a very good introductory tafsir. And then one can go to the more complex tafsirs like Fath al-Qadir by Shawkani, or like, for instance, after that, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari's tafsir or Qurtubi's tafsir. Regarding hadith, one begins, of course, first with Nawawi's 40 hadith, then maybe Riyadh al-Salihin, afterwards Bulugh al-Maram, a book of hadith dealing with the ahkam, the rules, regulations, and then one begins with, like, for instance, the Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, and the other books of hadith. And likewise, in Mustalah al-Hadith, usually they begin with a Nukhba by Ibn Hajar, a small essay in Mustalah al-Hadith, and then they graduate from that to one of the different abridgments of Ibn Salah's introduction to Mustalah al-Hadith, and then they go to even the more stronger books of Mustalah al-Hadith, like al-Iraqi's commentary. As far as Usul al-Fiqh, usually they begin with like a text like al-Waraqat by al-Juwayni, and then they graduate from that to more complex books of Usul al-Fiqh like Ibn Qudamah's Rawdat al-Nazar. In Sirah, usually they begin with just the basics of the Sirah of the Prophet. There are many basic books, and then they go to more detailed books of the Sirah like Ibn Hisham's Sirah and the commentary by As-Suhaili or Ibn Qayyim Zad al-Ma'ad. And but the point is that, I mean, in these matters, irrespective, there's not a single. What's important to understand, there's not a single course of study. There's nobody can say that you have to study with this book first and not study with that book. Each land of the Muslims have a different syllabus, just like every university would have a different, syllabus. And likewise, the sheikh who you're studying with might prefer to use these books as opposed to those books due to his familiarity or due to his judgment and feeling that these books are better books, more easy to be understood. So this differs, and Muslims have differed in the books. The books are just a means to an aim, and it's not an aim in and of itself. Okay. Just like now, if you go to, different colleges here in London, right? I mean, somebody might study chemistry, might have one book. Somebody might study chemistry, the other book, right? Nobody would start saying, oh, how come you're using this textbook for studying chemistry, and how come you're using that textbook? Because all understood, these are just books, basic books that teach you the basics of general chemistry. And that, the principles in it are basically the same. And the same thing with the books. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Anyway, that was in a very quick manner, 4 of the chapters, and as I said, there were 3 other chapters, the basics of Aqidah, which I guess some of the other tapes that I've done here in the United Kingdom, and also Da'wah and Jihad were 2 other chapters, which I sort of have given talks about before, but perhaps if there's another opportunity, maybe we can do lectures on those matters to complete the series. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. So I guess we can take a couple of questions, right? So there's brothers who don't have questions should head out to make wudu because it's about 10 minutes before Salah.
You mentioned the name of
well, I mean, the person has, opened himself a door of going astray, and maybe a door to going to unbelief. So he should be shown the error of the philosophers, and be encouraged not to seek, knowledge in these people who don't know what the unseen, because that's why it's the matter of the unseen. We only know about these matters through revelation. Yes, brother.
How important do you see Arabic?
Oh, that's very important. In fact, that was something I neglected because the book was written for Arabs, so the author obviously assumed people speak Arabic. But obviously, Arabic grammar and knowing Arabic is the key to studying the Sharia. I mean, those books that I mentioned, studying this book and that book, are all written in Arabic, and so.
Arabic first, then book. Or
yeah, Arabic. Well, Arabic first. I mean, there's some basic Islamic knowledge which a person should have. Basic beliefs, basic how to pray, if you're married, basic regulations of marriage and divorce, basic, regulations of buying and selling. Learn that in your own language, okay? But if you want to study the Sharia, formally, right, you need to learn Arabic. You need to learn Arabic.
Regarding knowledge, with the brain was knowledge, how would you think that someone would be the same knowledge to give someone? So, how would you feel if that brain was knowledge?
No, I mean that's not blameworthy knowledge. That means that's blameworthy character, right? Because blameworthy knowledge, we're talking about the knowledge itself. Is it praiseworthy to learn that, or is it blameworthy to know that? But if somebody Unless you meant that, maybe I misunderstood your question, if you meant that somebody learned something just to argue, if that's what you meant, then that is blameworthy knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ said that the person who learns knowledge so that people look at him and point to him and say, oh, he's a scholar, he's a brother, he knows something, or just to argue with the ignorance, you know what I'm saying, that he would not, receive the rewards of paradise. So, this is something which is blameworthy without doubt.
Contemplating going to Yemen or to learn under a sheikh or in Oxford, Medina, and I'm just wondering, do I come to the university type environment or do I go to a Muslim house or someone else?
My advice is that you go to Jama'at al-Iman in Yemen. But not, I didn't say go to Muqba, I said go to Jama'at al-Iman by Abdul Majid and Zindani in Yemen. That's my advice. No.
Those scholars who are involved and those scholars who are speaking to people, they like something or they like
I didn't hear the first part of the question, I apologize.
Those scholars who are behind bars.
Right.
Behind bars, they like teaching and like educating people. They like something funny.
No, I mean, that's not an argument. I mean, when Imam Ahmed was behind bars, right? Did people say that only Imam Ahmed was a true scholar and those scholars who were outside, who were not in jail, were not true scholars? Imam Ahmed became the Imam Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah because he, stayed firm and he refused to sign. But his best friend, Ali bin al-Madini, signed the paper saying the Quran was created. He agreed to kufr because he didn't feel that he could take the torture. Other scholars tried to flee, you know what I'm saying, and were brought back, by force. Like Imam al-Shafi'i was an old man who was brought by force in order to try to, And other scholars have said that they made some sort of ta'weed. So they said, like for instance, like a scholar would say, it is created when he put his hand on the Quran, but in his heart he would mean that his hand is created, looking at his hand on the Quran. So I think they took different positions regarding that matter, okay? Now, with regards to, a person being outside, it doesn't mean that he's corrupt or something like that because of that. There's no evidence for that.
During a public speech and saying elderly scholars starting out as well.
Well, you should, first of all, when something is in public and evil, right, one has to try not to lead to a greater evil. Usually people will, when they see Muslims argue, they blame both Muslims, even if one Muslim happens to be for the truth. So if you're in a public speech and they're defaming a scholar and you stand up and you say something forcefully, right, the listeners, right, will most likely blame both the speaker and you for arguing. And the truth will get lost. So is the idea just to raise your voice and make a statement, or is the idea to bring guidance to people to clear up the thing? So, I would suggest in a situation like that to try to, reason with the speaker as to maybe why what he's saying is incorrect. Because if you just to stand up and say something, you know what I'm saying? Most people would say, oh, who's this, guy just, making noise in the conference or making noise in the lecture, or who are you, you're an agent and you're this and that. And the truth gets lost, right? And the aim is to guide people, you know what I'm saying? Right. Whether who needs to make wudu should go. We have 5 minutes more for those who have wudu.
My first question is not actually linked to this last topic, but on the question of unity, and you're saying about the couple doing the Muslim trying to find Shafi'i or
yeah.
How would you relate this to someone who is in a community or someone like the Hanafis and is seen as an obvious outcast, Wahhabi, yeah?
No.
How far should the person go to achieve the community, even if it means the parents as well?
If the person is giving up something which is from the mustahabbat of salah, the sunnah of salah, then it's more preferable here if it's going to cause friction in the masjid, okay, not to do salah in the manner of the sunnah. You see what I'm saying? And I remember one time when I was in China, we went to the masjid in Beijing. It's a masjid which is about 1,000 years old, and the people there are very elderly people, and they're elderly Chinese, and they're Hanafis, right? So when we came time for Salah, we all prayed like, according to the Hanafi method, because if we were visiting this place, right, and you're Muslims from outside, they probably never have seen, Muslims, maybe like that, and you start praying in a way different than them, okay? It's going to cause, some sort of confusion in that message. These people don't speak Arabic, they're elderly Chinese people, they might have, the Communist Party, we're watching our movies going forth and going back, we don't want to be stopped and prevented from, trying to meet, Muslims and so forth. So, it depends on the situation, right? But if you're in a masjid, for instance, where there's a lot of people who are observing the Sunnah, now there's some people who are not observing the Sunnah, then one can, pray with the Sunnah. If you're in a position of authority in the masjid, where the people, like, for instance, all bring their children to learn from you Qur'an, or that people respect you in the masjid, you know what I'm saying? There's a knowledgeable brother, you should pray according to the way of the Sunnah. So it depends on the situation. One cannot make a hard and fast rule.
So, I mean, how far can one go in actually continuing in one family and the family of students that accept any other difference? I mean, how long? I mean, some people I know was when they ever go home or when their parents, they pray all the time like that. I mean,
but we're talking about Jama'ah prayers in the masjid.
Anywhere in the whole.
No, because when you're praying your prayer by yourself, right? You should. Here it depends if it's going to cause a fitna or not. I mean, that's the point. I mean, if by putting your hands, for instance, on your chest, right? Some scholars hold that putting it on the chest is wise, but the majority holds that this is mustahab. Okay, so let's take by that opinion that it's mustahab. Therefore, you're not committing a sin by putting it, by the side or by putting it below your navel. Okay, according to that opinion. Now, the point is, if by putting your hands on the chest, okay, it's going to cause your parents to get into a fight with you, okay, and cause great fitna in the household, okay, would it then, okay, be permissible to do something which is mustahab, which is going to result in such a great fitna in one's household? Obviously not, okay. But if the parents are such where they dislike it, okay, but it's not going to result in a fitna, then one should do the act of the sunnah. And so, the point is that, the point is that one does not do something which is mustahab. I mean, this is the rule, that one does not do something which is mustahab if by doing it it's going to lead to a greater evil or the loss of something which is wajib.
A minute to the prayer, يا أخي.
طيب جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك.